The Blind Owl. The printing and sale of this work in Iran is forbidden. In life, there are wounds that, like leprosy, silently scrape at and consume the soul. In solitude, this agony cannot be revealed to anyone because they generally tend to group this incomprehensible suffering with strange and otherwise rare events. And if one speaks or writes about it, then people, by way of popular perception and their own beliefs, receive it with a doubtful and mocking smile. Because man has still found no cure for this, and the only available medicine is amnesia by means of wine and artificial sleep brought on by opium and other narcotics. But alas, the effects of these medicines are at best temporary, and instead of providing relief, after a while only add to the intensity of the pain. Will there be a day when someone discovers the secrets of these supernatural events, that reflection of the shadow of the soul that manifests itself between awakening and sleep in a state of purgatory and unconsciousness? I'm only going to relate one of these events which I myself experienced, and which moved me to such a degree that I shall never forget it, and its ominous mark shall fill my life with poison for as long as I am alive, from the day of creation to that place which is beyond the understanding of man. I wrote poison, but I wanted to say that I have always and will always bear its mark that was branded with a hot iron. I will attempt to write all that I remember, all that remains in my mind from the interconnections between the events. Maybe I can come to a general judgment about it. No, perhaps it is for reassurance, or essentially so that I can believe it myself. Because for me, it absolutely does not matter if others believe it or not. My only fear is that I will die tomorrow and still not know myself. For in the course of my life experiences, I came to this understanding that there existed a dreadful chasm between myself and others, and I understand that as much as possible one should remain inaudible. As much as possible I should keep my thoughts to myself, and if now I have decided to write, it is only to introduce myself to my shadow, a bent shadow on the wall, and it is as if the more I write, it devours it with an even greater appetite. It is for him that I wish to carry out an experiment, to see if we can come to know each other better, because from the time that I cut myself off from others, I have wanted to know myself better. Empty thoughts, that may be, but they torture me more than any reality. Are these people who look similar to me, that on the surface have the same needs and wants as myself? Are they not here for me to be deceived? Are they not just a handful of shadows that were created for the purpose of deceiving and mocking me? Is not all that I feel, see, and ponder completely illusory, far from reality? I only write for my shadow, that in front of the lamp is cast on the wall. I must introduce myself to him. In this debased and wretched world, full of destitution and want, for the first time I thought that a beam of sunshine had shone upon my life. But alas, this was not a beam of sunshine, it was a flicker of light, a shooting star that appeared before me in the form of a woman, or an angel. And in the flash of that one moment, in that 1 second, I saw all the misfortunes of my own life, and stood amazed at their magnitude and splendor, and into the whirlpool of darkness into which it should have vanished, it again vanished. No, I was not able to hold on to this ray of light. It has been 3 months, no, 2 months and 4 days since I lost track of her, but the memento of her bewitching eyes, of the enticing sparkle of her eyes, has always remained with me. How could I ever forget that someone who is so intricately tied to my own life? No, I shall never utter her name, for she, with her ethereal, slim and shadowy limbs, with her two large, wondrous and shining eyes, behind which my life slowly and painfully liquefied and burned, she no longer belongs to this brutal and wretched world. No, I must not defile her name with earthly things. No, I must not defile her name with earthly things. After her, I completely withdrew from the company of man, the company of the fortunate and the fools, and in order to forget, I sought refuge in opium and wine. The entire day my life used to and continues to pass between the four walls of my room. My entire life has passed between four walls. The entire day my work consisted of painting on pen case covers. I spent all of my time painting on pen case covers, drinking wine and smoking opium, and I chose the absurd job of painting on pen case covers in order to stupefy myself, in order to kill time. As luck would have it, my house is located outside the city, in a quiet and peaceful place, far from the commotion and clamour of people's lives. Its borders are completely distinct, and it is surrounded by ruins. Only from the other side of the ditch do the dilapidated mud houses appear, and the city begin. I do not know what tasteless or madman from time immemorial built this house. When I close my eyes, I not only see all of its nooks and crannies, but I also feel their entire weight upon my shoulders. A house that could only have been painted on ancient pen cases. I have to write down all of this to make sure I have not been in error myself. I have to explain all of this to my shadow that is cast on the wall. Yes, previously there was only one thing that was left that made me happy. Between the four walls of my room I painted on pen cases and passed the time with this absurd diversion. But after I saw those two eyes, after I saw her, the meaning and the worth of any movement or action left my mind. But what is strange, what is unbelievable, is that I do not know why. From the beginning, all the scenes of my paintings appeared exactly the same. I always painted a hunched-over old man that looked like a Hindu yogi, wearing a cloak with a turban wrapped around his head, squatting underneath a cypress tree, who, with an astonished look, placed the index finger of his left hand to his lips. In front of him, a damsel in a long black dress, bent over, was offering him a morning glory flower. For between them there was a small stream. Had I seen this scene before, or did it appear before me in a dream? I do not know. The only thing I am certain of is that I always ended up painting the same subject and the same scene. My hand involuntarily painted this scene, and stranger still, there were customers interested in this subject. And through my uncle, I even sent those pen cases to India, where he would sell them and send the money back to me. This scene seemed to me at once both familiar and distant. I cannot exactly recall. I have just remembered this. I said I have to write down my memories, but this incident happened much later and has nothing to do with this. And it was because of this incident that I put aside my paintbrush. 2 months ago. No, 2 months and 4 days have gone by. It was the 13th day of Nowruz. The entire populace had swooped down upon the countryside. I had closed the window of my room in order to paint without interruption. It was dusk. I was engrossed in painting when suddenly the door opened and my uncle entered. That is to say, he himself told me he was my uncle. I had never seen him before. He had been on a faraway journey since the beginning of my childhood. Perhaps he was the captain of a ship. I imagined he had some business dealing with me, because I heard he was a merchant as well. In any case, my uncle was a hunched-over old man with an Indian turban on his head, wearing a tattered yellow robe with a shawl wrapped around his face. his hairy chest visible underneath his open collar. You could count, one by one, the hairs of his beard that stuck out from underneath his shawl. He had a hare lip and red, festering eyelids. He had a remote and comical similarity to myself, as if my image had been cast upon a Yinaya deck. I always imagined that my father looked like this. As soon as he entered, he went to the corner of the room and squatted. It occurred to me that I should offer him something. I lit a lamp, went into the dark closet of my room, and searched all around to see if I could find something. Even if I knew there was nothing in the house, as I did not have any opium or wine left. Suddenly my gaze turned to the top shelf. Perhaps it was a revelation. I saw that a flask of old wine that I had inherited, maybe they made this wine for the commemoration of my birth, was on the top shelf. Never had I entertained such a notion. I had completely forgotten that there was such a thing in the house. In order to reach the top shelf, I stood on top of the stool, but as I reached for the flask, my gaze suddenly shifted to the small vent that led to the outside. In the field behind my room, I saw a hunched-over old man sitting underneath a cypress tree, and a damsel, no, a celestial angel, was standing in front of him, slightly bent over, offering a bruised morning glory to him with her right hand. Meanwhile, the old man was chewing the fingernail of his left index finger. The damsel was right in front of me, but it seemed as if she was completely unaware of her surroundings. She looked without having looked. An involuntary smile was frozen on her lips, as if she was thinking about someone who was not there. It was from there that those terrifying and enchanting eyes that seemed to bitterly mock one, those restless, wondrous, threatening and promising eyes of hers, and my lifeblood fell onto those meaningful and shiny globes and was absorbed into their depths. This mesmerizing looking-glass pulled at my entire being to the point where the mind of man becomes feeble. Slanted, turquoise eyes that had a supernatural and intoxicating brightness, which attracted and frightened one at the same time. It was as if, with her eyes, she had seen supernatural and frightening scenes that not everyone could see. Prominent cheeks, a high forehead, slender eyebrows that were conjoined, full-bodied lips that were half open, lips that seemed to have just separated from a long, warm kiss, but still insatiable. Her black tousled hair covered the edges of her moonlit face, and one of its tresses hung over her temple. The delicacy of her limbs and heedlessness of her ethereal movements spoke of her frailty and impermanence. Only a Hindu temple dancer could have had the same graceful movements as she. Her sad expression and her joy filled with sorrow. All of these showed that she was not like ordinary people. For certain, her beauty was not pedestrian. She appeared before me as having stepped out of an opium-laced paradise. She created an arousal in me like that which is derived from mandrake. Her long and slender limbs and the symmetric line that went down from her shoulders, arms, breasts, chest, buttocks, and calves seemed as if they had just been torn from her lover's embrace, as if she was the female mandrake that had just been torn from her lover's embrace. She was wearing a wrinkled black dress that clung tightly to her body. When I looked at her, it seemed that she wanted to jump over the stream that separated her and the old man, but could not. Then the old man started to laugh. It was a dry, grating laugh that made the hairs on one's body stand on end. Without his face changing, he gave out a hard laugh that was degenerate and mocking, like the echo of a laugh that has made it out of a void. Flask of wine in hand and confused, I jumped off the stool. I do not know why I was shaking. It was a trembling that was full of fear and pleasure, as if I had just awoken from a refreshing and frightening dream. I placed the flask of wine on the ground and held my head with both hands. For how many minutes or hours did this last? I do not know. As soon as I came to, I grabbed the flask of wine and entered the room. I saw that my uncle had gone, and that he had left the door cracked open like the mouth of the dead. The sound of the old man's dry laughter was still ringing in my ears. The sky was turning dark. The lamp was smoking, but the after-effects of that terrifying and intoxicating trembling that I had sensed within myself were still with me. My life changed from that moment. One glance was enough, because that heavenly angel, that ethereal damsel, to a degree that is beyond the understanding of man, left her indelible mark on me. During this time I was beside myself. It was as if I had known her name from before. The sparkle of her eyes, her colour, her smell, and movements all seemed familiar to me, as if, in a former life, in the realm of purgatory, our souls had been conjoined of one source and one substance, destined to join again. I must have been close to her in this life. I never wanted to touch her. The invisible rays that were emitted from our bodies and that became intertwined were enough. This frightening occurrence that immediately seemed familiar to me. Do not two lovers always have this same feeling, that they have seen each other previously, that a mystical relationship once existed between them? In a wretched world such as this, I either wanted her love or the love of no one. How could anyone else affect me so? But the dry, grating laughter of the old man, that inauspicious laughter, tore the ties that bound us together. All night I was thinking of this. Several times I wanted to go and peer through the opening in the wall, but I was scared of the old man's laughter, and the next day I only thought of the same. Could I really tolerate not seeing her? The day after that, notwithstanding my intense fear, I decided to place the flask of wine back in its place. But as soon as I pulled the closet's curtain aside and looked inside, the dark black wall, with the same darkness that has covered my entire life, was in front of me. There was absolutely no trace of any opening or passage leading to the outside. The small square opening was completely closed off and had become part of the wall, as if it had never even existed. I pulled the stool forward, but no matter how many times I madly pounded on the wall and listened, or brought the lamp forth and looked, the slightest trace of that opening could not be seen, and my blows had no effect on that thick and sturdy wall. It had become a solid mass of lead. Could I have abandoned this completely? But it was not in my hands. From henceforth I was like a soul in torture. All my waiting, all my standing guard, all my searching, all was in vain. I searched all the areas around my house, not 1 day, not 2 days, rather for 2 months and 4 days, like a murderer who returns to the scene of the crime every day around dusk. Like a headless chicken, I paced around our house, so much so that I came to know all the pebbles and stones in the area. But I found no trace of the cypress tree, of the stream, and the people I had seen there. So many nights I knelt before the moonlight, and I begged and pleaded with the trees, with the rocks, with the moon, for she may have looked at the moon, and I called on all the creatures for help, but I found no trace of her. I essentially understood that all of this was useless, for she could not be connected or related to earthly things. For example, the water with which she washed her hair must have come from a spring forbidden to the unacquainted, or from an enchanted cave. The warp and woof of her clothes were not made from ordinary cotton and wool, They were not woven by earthly hands, the hands of humans. She was a chosen one. I understood that those morning glories were not ordinary flowers. I was sure that if she washed her face with ordinary water, her face would wither, and if she picked up an ordinary morning glory flower with her long and slender fingers, her fingers would wilt like a flower petal. I understood all of this. This damsel, no, this angel, was the source of amazement and an inexplicable revelation for me. Her presence was graced and intangible. It was she who awakened the feeling of prayer in me. I am certain that the look of a stranger, an ordinary person, would defile her and cause her to wilt. From the moment that I lost her, from the time a massive wall, a damp dam without an opening, as heavy as lead, was erected between us, I felt as if my life had become forever meaningless and lost. Even if my caressing gaze and the deep pleasure I took in seeing her were one-sided and unrequited, it was only because she had not seen me. But I needed these eyes, and one look from her was enough to solve all philosophical problems and riddles of the divine. One look from her and secrets and riddles no longer had any meaning for me. From this time forward I increased my intake of opium and wine. But alas, instead of these drugs of despair crippling and weakening my thoughts, instead of forgetting, day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute, thoughts of her, her limbs, her face materialized ever stronger before me. How could I ever forget her? Whether my eyes were open or shut, awake or asleep, she was always in front of me, through the opening in the closet of my room, through the rectangular hole that opened to the outside. Like the night that has learned the thoughts and reasoning of man, she was always in front of my eyes. Any peace was forbidden to me. How could I have had any peace? Every day towards sunset I took up the habit of taking a stroll. I do not know why I wanted to, and insisted on finding the stream, the cypress tree, and the patch of morning glories. The same way I became addicted to opium, I became addicted to these walks, as if an unseen force coaxed me into such action. I thought of her the entire way, remembering the first time I laid eyes on her, wanting to find the place I first saw her, on Sadegh Hedayat. If I could find that place, if I could sit under the cypress tree, then surely I would find some peace in my life. But alas, besides thorns and burning sand and a horse's rib bone and a dog that was snuffing through the garbage, there was nothing else. Did I truthfully ever meet her? Never. I had only seen her slyly and stealthily from a hole, from a miserable opening in the closet of my room, like a hungry dog that snuffles and rummages through the garbage. But as soon as they bring a basket of waste, he hides from fear, returning later to pick out anew his delicious morsels from the garbage. I too had the same feeling, but the opening had been blocked. To me, she was a fresh bouquet of flowers that had been thrown on a pile of garbage. The last night on which I took a stroll, like every other night, the weather was muggy and wet, and a thick fog had unfurled all around. In the rainy weather that dulls colours and the brazen lines of things, I felt a sort of ease and freedom, as if the rain were washing away my dark thoughts. In this night, that which should not have happened did happen. I was aimlessly roaming, but in these lonely hours, in these minutes, the duration of which now escapes me, much more intensely than before, her terrified and obscure face, as if emerging from behind smoke and clouds, her motionless and expressionless face, as if a painting on a pencase cover, appeared before my eyes. When I returned, I think that much of the night had passed and a thick fog had set in, so much that I could barely see where I was walking, but from force of habit, from the awakening of a special sense within me, when I reached my doorstep I was able to see a figure clad in black, the figure of a lady, sitting on a bench next to my house. I struck a match to see the keyhole, but I did not know why my eyes involuntarily drifted toward the figure clad in black, and I immediately recognized, without even looking, the two slanted eyes, the two large black eyes set in the thin moonlit face, those same eyes that in a human form dazzled. If I had not seen her prior to this, I would still have recognized her. No, I was not fooled. This figure clad in black was her. I was frozen in place. I stood there, stunned and dizzy, like a person who is dreaming and who himself knows he is dreaming and wants to wake up but cannot. The match burned till the very end and burned my fingers. Then I suddenly came to. I turned the key in the lock. The door opened. I stepped aside. Like a person who knows the way, she got up from the bench, passed along the dark corridor, and opened the door to my room. I entered the room behind her. I clumsily lit the lamp. I saw that she had gone to my bed and was laying down with her face in the shadows. I did not know if she was looking at me or not, if she was able to hear me or not. On the surface, it seemed she had neither fear nor the penchant for resistance. It was as if she had come here involuntarily. Was she ill? Had she lost her way? She had come as one who is lacking will, like a sleepwalker. No being can imagine the feelings I was experiencing in that moment. I felt an indescribable and invigorating pain. No, I had not been fooled. This was the same woman, the same damsel who, without astonishment, without saying one word, entered my room. I always imagined that our first meeting would be like this. This condition felt like being sentenced to a deep and never-ending sleep. For one must delve into a deep sleep to see such a dream, and this silence felt like being sentenced to an immortal life. For one cannot speak when one is in the state of eternity that has no beginning or end. I regarded her as a woman, though at the same time she carried within her something that was beyond human. Her face produced a dizzying forgetfulness of all other faces, so much that my knees became weak and my limbs were brought to a tremble when I watched her. In that instant, I saw the painful story of my own life behind her large, extremely large eyes, shiny and wet eyes, like round black diamonds thrown into teardrops. In her eyes, in her black eyes, I found the eternal night and concentrated darkness that I was looking for, and I was engulfed in their dark and terrifying enchantment, as if a force were being pulled out of me, as if the ground underneath my feet was shaking, and if I had fallen I would have experienced an indescribable euphoria. My heart stood still. I held my breath. I feared that if I drew a breath she would dissipate like smoke or a cloud. Her silence had the power of a disabling command. It was as if a crystalline wall had been erected between us. I was to suffocate from this instant, from this hour, or for eternity, as if they had seen something unnatural that not anyone can see, as if they had seen death. Her tired eyes slowly shut, her eyelids closed, and I, like a drowning man who after much effort and thrashing about comes to the surface of water, was shaking from a high fever and wiped the sweat on my forehead with the end of my sleeve. Her face carried the same calm and motionless expression, but it seemed as if she had become thinner and frailer. She was chewing the index finger of her left hand as she lay there. The colour of her face was like the moonlight, and behind the delicate black dress that clung to her body, I could see the outline of her calf, arms and 2 breasts, and her entire body. Because she had closed her eyes, I bent over to see her better, but the more I looked at her face, the farther away from me she seemed. Suddenly I felt that I was not in the least privy to the secrets of her heart, and that there was no connection between us. I wanted to say something, but I feared that her ears, her delicate ears that must have been used to hearing a distant, celestial and soothing music, would be disgusted by my voice. It occurred to me that she might be hungry or thirsty. I went into the closet of my room to find her something, even if I knew there was nothing to be found in the house. But it was like a revelation. I had a flask of old wine on the top shelf that I had inherited from my father. I positioned the stool and brought down the flask of wine, tiptoeing. I reached the side of the bed. I saw that she was sleeping like a tired, exhausted child. She was sound asleep, and her long eyelashes, like velvet, had closed on top of one another. I opened the flask's cap and slowly poured a cupful of wine through her clenched teeth into her mouth. For the first time in my life, a sense of inner peace suddenly appeared, for I saw that those eyes had closed. It was as if the cancer that was torturing me, or the phantasm that was squeezing my insides with its iron claws, had eased up a bit. I brought my chair, placed it next to the bed, and stared into her face. What a childish face! What a strange expression! Could it be that this woman, this damsel, or this tortured angel, for I do not know what to call her, could it be that she had a double life, so calm, so unaffected? Now I was able to feel the warmth of her body and smell the damp scent that emanated from her heavy black hair. I do not know why I raised my trembling hands, for my hands were beyond my control, and caressed her hair, the tresses that always clung to her temple. Then I ran my fingers through her hair. Her hair was cold and damp, cold, completely cold, as if she had been dead for several days. I was not mistaken, she was dead. I placed my hand under her shirt, over her breast and heart. I could not feel the faintest heartbeat. I brought the mirror and placed it in front of her nose, but there did not exist in her the faintest trace of life. I wanted to warm her with the heat of my own body. I wanted to give her what heat I had and take from her the coldness of death, so that, perhaps in this manner, I could place my spirit into her body. I took off my clothes and lay next to her on the bed. We were conjoined like the male and female mandrake. In essence, her body was like the body of a female mandrake that has been torn from her lover's embrace, carrying the same burning love as the mandrake. Her mouth, acrid and bitter, tasted like the end of a cucumber. Her entire body was as cold as hail. I was feeling the blood freeze in my arteries, and this cold was penetrating the deepest depths of my heart. All of my efforts were in vain. I got off the bed, put my clothes on. No, it was not a falsehood. She had come here into my room on my bed and surrendered herself to me. Her body and soul. She gave them both to me. While she was alive, as long as her eyes were brimming with life, just the thought of her eyes would torture me. But now, without motion or feeling, cold and with closed eyes, she had come and surrendered herself to me, with closed eyes. This was the same person who had poisoned my entire life, or perhaps my life was well disposed to being poisoned, and I could not have had any other life than a poisoned one. Now, here in my room, she gave her life and shadow to me. Her fragile and evanescent soul, which had no relationship to the world of earth-dwellers, slowly emerged from her wrinkled black dress, from the body that tortured it. and went to the world of wandering shadows. Perhaps she also took my shadow, but her body was lying there, without motion or feeling. Her soft and flaccid muscles, her veins, legs and bones were all waiting to rot. A delicious banquet for the worms and rats that live under the earth was being prepared. In such a hapless room full of misery and want, in a room that was like a grave, in the midst of the eternal darkness of the night that had surrounded me and penetrated the walls, I had to spend a long, dark, cold and endless night next to a corpse, with her corpse. It occurred to me that as long as the world and I have existed, a corpse, a cold corpse without motion or feeling, has been with me in this dark room. In this moment, my thoughts froze. A life belonging to that of an extraordinary person was born in me. As my life was tied to all the beings around me, to all the shadows that quivered around me, and because of the profound and inseparable connection I had with the world, the movements of creatures and nature, and because of the restless current between myself and all the elements of nature that had been established by way of invisible threads, no idea or thought seemed unnatural to me. I was entirely content to uncover the secrets of ancient paintings, the mysteries of abstruse philosophical texts, the eternal depths of species and forms. For in this moment, I was partaking in the turning of heaven and earth, in the design and appearance of plant life, in the movement of beasts. Past and future, near and far, became partner to and melded with my spiritual existence. At such times, each person seeks refuge in the one strong habit they call their own. In their one compulsion, the drinker goes out and gets drunk. The writer writes. The stone-cutter cuts stone, and in the impetus of their compulsion, each, as a means of escape, empties their frustration and sorrows. And it is at such a time that a true artist can create a masterpiece from within. But I who was talentless and pitiful, a painter of pen-case covers, what could I do? With these images that were empty, glossy and soulless, that all looked the same, what could I paint that would become a masterpiece? But I was feeling an overflowing enthusiasm and brimming talent in my entire being. It was a special kind of exhilaration. I wanted to paint on paper and keep for myself these eyes that had become forever closed. This feeling persuaded me to carry out my decision. That is, it was out of my control, especially when one is trapped with a corpse. This thought created a particular sense of happiness in me. Finally, I turned off the lamp that was smoking, brought 2 candles and lit them above her head. In the flickering candlelight her face became calmer, and in the shadow and light of the room her face took on a mysterious and ethereal expression. I picked up the paper and my painting supplies and went next to her bed. For this bed was now hers. I wanted to leisurely paint its lines, to capture on paper this face that extremely slowly and piece by piece was condemned to decomposition and nothingness. This face that seemed to be motionless and carrying a singular expression. I wanted to choose those same lines of this face that had an effect on me. No matter how simple and brief a painting may be, it must leave an impression and have a soul of its own. But I, who had gotten used to mechanical paintings on pen-case covers, I would now have to start thinking and imagine it, meaning that elusive part of her face that left an impression on me. In my brain, throw a glance at her, then close my eyes and place on paper the lines of her face that I chose, so that, with my mind, I might find an opiate for my tortured soul. In the end, I took refuge in the motionless world of lines and shapes. This was particularly agreeable to my method of painting the deceased, painting from the deceased. In principle, I was a painter of the dead, but the eyes, her closed eyes, did I need to see them again? Were they not clearly envisioned in my thoughts and mind already? I do not know how many times I painted that face until morning, but none suited me. I tore them up as I painted them. I neither tired of this task, nor did I feel the passage of time. It was twilight. An opaque light had entered my room from behind the window. I was busy with an image that I thought had turned out better than the rest, but the eyes, those rebuking eyes that seemed to have uncovered unforgivable sins in my person, I could not bring out those eyes on paper. All of a sudden the remembrance and entire existence of those eyes were erased from my memory. My efforts were useless. No matter how many times I looked at her face, I could not remember their expression. Suddenly I saw that her cheeks slowly began to glow with life, with a red jacquard colour, like the meat in the front of a butcher's shop, and her wide, open and wondrous eyes which had gathered all the radiance of life, and which shone with an ailing light. Her sick-looking, rebuking eyes very slowly opened and looked at my face. It was the first time that she had become aware of me. She looked at me, and then her eyes closed once more. Perhaps this event lasted no longer than a moment, but it was enough for me to capture the expression of her eyes and bring it out on paper. With the tip of the paintbrush, I painted this expression, and this time I did not tear up the painting. Then I stood up, slowly moved close to her, thinking that she was still alive, that she had come alive, that my love had breathed life into her corpse. But up close I sensed the smell of the dead, the smell of the decomposing dead. On her body, small worms were squirming on top of one another, and 2 greenbottle flies were circling over her. In the candlelight, she was thoroughly dead, but why? How did her eyes open? I do not know. Did I see it in an imaginary state? Was there any truth in it? I do not want anyone to question me on this, but the main thing was her face, no, her eyes, and now I had possession of these eyes. I had on paper the soul of her eyes, and I no longer had any use for her body. Her body that was condemned to nothingness, the prey of worms and underground rats. Now, from here on out, she was under my control. I was her minion no longer. Any moment that I was so inclined, I could see her eyes. I placed the painting, with even greater care, in the tin box in which I kept my earnings, and hid it in the closet of my room. The night was slowly drifting away, tiptoe by tiptoe. Perhaps it had rested enough. Faint, far-away sounds could be heard. Maybe a hen or a passing bird was dreaming. Maybe the plants were growing. The pale stars disappeared behind the cloud banks. I felt the soft breath of morning on my face as the cry of the rooster rose from the distance. What could I do with a corpse that had started to decompose? At first I thought that I should bury her in my own room. Then I thought that I should take her out and throw her down a well, in a well that had bruised morning glories growing around it. But to do all these things without anyone seeing, how much thought, effort, and skill were needed! In addition, I did not want a stranger's gaze to be cast upon her. I would have to do all these things alone and with my own hands. To hell with me! What use was my life after her? But she never, none of the ordinary people, no one but I should have set eyes on her dead body. She had come to my room. She had surrendered her cold and black body to me so that no one else would see her, so as not to be polluted by the glance of a stranger. At last a thought came to me. If I could cut up her body in pieces and place them in my old suitcase, and take her with me outside, far, far from the eyes of people, and bury her. This time I no longer hesitated. I took the bone-handled knife from my closet, and first off I carefully cut the delicate black dress, which, like a spider's web, had imprisoned her, and was the only thing that was covering her body. It was as if she had grown because she seemed taller than usual. Then I severed her head. Drops of cold, coagulated blood came out of her throat. Then I cut up her arms and legs and neatly placed her body and all the parts in the suitcase, and placed her clothes, the same black dress, over her body. I locked the suitcase and placed the key in my pocket. As soon as I had finished, I breathed a sigh of relief, picked up the suitcase and weighed it. It was heavy. Never had such a feeling of weariness come over me. No, I could never carry the suitcase by myself. The weather turned cloudy again, and a light rain had started. I left my room so that I might find somebody to help me carry the suitcase. Not a soul could be seen. I looked more closely. In the distance and behind the fog I saw a hunched-over old man sitting underneath a cypress tree. His face, which had a wide scarf wrapped around it, could not be seen. Slowly I moved towards him. I still had not said anything. The old man burst into a degenerate, dry, grating laugh, so much so that the hairs on my body stood on end, and said, "If you want a coolie, I'm ready myself. Yes, I also have a carriage that I use as a hearse. Every day I take the dead and bury 'em in Shabdolazim. Yes, I also make coffins. I've coffins to fit anyone, down to the last hair. I'm ready myself, right now." He was laughing so hard that his shoulders were shaking. I pointed the way to my house, but he did not give me the chance to speak, and said, "Don't bother. I know where you live. Let's go. Right now, yes." He got up. I went toward the house. I went into my room and, with much effort, brought the dead suitcase to the edge of the door. In front of my door I saw an old and dilapidated hearse that had hitched to it 2 black horses, emaciated like cadavers. The hunched-over old man was sitting up on the seat and had a long whip in hand, but he never turned to look in my direction. With much effort I placed the suitcase in the carriage, which had a special space for a coffin inside of it. I got in and lay down in the coffin's space and rested my head on its ledge, so I could look at the scenery. Then I slid the suitcase on my chest and held it tightly with my 2 hands. The whip sounded in the air. The horses, taking long and soft leaps, started moving with laboured breaths. In the rainy weather, their misty breaths looked like pipes of smoke coming out of their nostrils, their slender hooves like fingers of a thief that had been cut off and dipped into boiling oil according to law, slowly rose up and silently touched the ground. The sound of the bells tied around their necks played a peculiar song in the damp air. A type of indescribable and reasonless comfort enveloped me from head to toe, such that the water in my stomach did not stir with the movement of the carriage. I only felt the weight of the suitcase on my chest. Her body, her corpse, it was as if this weight had always pressed against my chest. A thick fog clung to the road. The carriage passed mountains, fields, and rivers with a special ease and speed. A new and singular scenery that I had neither seen in wakefulness nor sleep surrounded me. Jagged mountains, strange, sickly-looking trees, accursed trees, lined both sides of the road, and through them those grey houses could be seen, houses shaped like triangles, cubes and prisms, with squat, dark and glassless windows. These windows resembled the dazed eyes of one with fevered hallucinations. I do not know what the walls were made of that enabled them to transfer the chill and cold to the heart of man. It was as if no living creature could ever dwell in these houses. Maybe it had been made for the shadows of ethereal creatures. Perhaps the carriage driver was taking me via a special road or a byway. Some places only had tree stumps and crooked trees lining the road, and behind them tall and squat houses in geometrical shapes, cones, truncated cones with thin and crooked windows could be seen. Bruised morning glories sprung up from between these houses and climbed their doors and walls. Suddenly this scene disappeared behind the thick fog. Heavy, pregnant clouds squeezed the mountain peaks they were clutching, and the drizzle scattered in the sky like aimless, wandering dust. After we had gone a good while, the hearse stopped near a tall mountain that was barren and parched. I slid the suitcase off my chest and got up. Behind the mountain there was a secluded, peaceful and scenic area, a place that I had never seen before and did not recognize. Yet it did seem familiar to me, as if it were not beyond my imagination. The ground was covered with patches of bruised morning glories. It seemed as if until now no one had set foot in this area. I placed the suitcase on the ground. The old carriage driver turned and said, "This place is near Shabdolazim. You can't find a better place than this. You can't even find a single bird flying here. Yes." I placed my hand in my pocket to pay the carriage driver. I only had 2 garans and 1 abasi. The carriage driver gave a dry, grating laugh and said, "Don't bother. I'll get it later. I know where you live. You didn't want anything else from me, did you? Know this much, that in digging graves I am not unskilled, yes. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. Let's go right by the river, near the cypress tree, and I'll dig you up a hole the size of your suitcase, and I'll be on my way." The old man jumped down from his seat with a particular nimbleness that I would never have imagined. I picked up the suitcase, and the 2 of us went near the tree stump that was along the bank of a dried-up river. "Is this spot good?" he said. And without waiting for my reply, he started digging with a trowel and pick that he had with him. I placed the suitcase on the ground and stood there astounded. With his hunched-over back and the nimbleness of an experienced worker, the old man toiled away. While digging, he found something resembling a glazed jug. He wrapped it in a grimy handkerchief, stood up and said, "Here's the hole, yes, exactly the size of the suitcase, down to the last hair, yes." I placed my hand in my pocket to pay him. I did not have more than 2 garans and 1 abasi. The carriage driver gave a dry, repulsive laugh and said, "Don't bother, there's no need. I know where you live, yes. Besides, instead of my pay, I found a jug, a raghair flower vase, from the ancient city of Ray, yes." Then, with his bent, hunched-over frame, he started to laugh, so hard that his shoulders were shaking. With the jug that was wrapped in the grimy handkerchief under his arm, he walked toward the carriage hearse, and with a particular nimbleness hoisted himself upon the seat. The whip sounded in the air. The horses started moving with laboured breaths. The sound of the bells tied around their necks played a peculiar song in the damp air, and slowly, before my eyes, they disappeared into the fog. As soon as I was left alone, I breathed a sigh of relief. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my chest, and an invigorating tranquillity enveloped me from head to toe. I looked around me. This was a small area that was stuck between the black hills and mountains. Old ruins and buildings made of thick mud bricks, and the nearby dried-up river could be seen on the mountain range. This was a far-off, cozy and quiet place. From the bottom of my heart I was happy, and thought to myself that when those large eyes would awaken from their earthly sleep, they would find themselves in a place befitting her constitution and temperament. Besides, she needed to be far from the rest of mankind, far from the dead of others, the same way that in life she was far from the lives of others. I carefully picked up the suitcase and placed it in the hole. The hole was exactly the size of the suitcase, not a hair off. But for one last time I wanted to look inside it, in the suitcase. I looked around. Not a soul could be seen. I took out the key from my pocket and opened the suitcase. But when I moved the edge of her black dress aside, amid the clotted blood and worms that were squirming on top of one another, I saw two large black eyes staring at me without expression, and my life drowned in the depths of these eyes. I hurriedly closed the suitcase and covered it with dirt. Then I stomped on the dirt to pack it down, went over and brought back some scentless, bruised morning glories and planted them in the dirt. Then I brought over gravel and sand and spread them out over the dirt until all traces of the grave were concealed, so that no one could discern it. So well did I do this job that even I could not tell her grave apart from the rest of the land. Once my work was done, I took a look at myself. I saw that my clothes were dirt-ridden and torn, with black blood clots stuck to them. 2 green bottle flies were flying around me, and small worms were attached to my body, squirming on top of one another. I wanted to clean the blood stain from my clothes, but the more I wet my sleeve with saliva and rubbed it, the more it became ingrained, and the richer became its colour, such that it seeped into my entire body, and I felt the slimy chill of the blood all over me. It was near dusk. A light rain was falling. I began to walk, unconsciously following the tracks of the carriage hearse. As soon as it became dark, I lost the tracks left by the carriage hearse. I slowly walked in the thick, packed darkness, without destination, without thought, without purpose, and did not know where I would reach, for after her, after I had seen those large eyes amid the clotted blood, I was walking in the dark night, in the profound night that had covered my entire life, for those 2 eyes that had served to light my path were now forever extinguished, and in this case it was the same for me if I was ever able to reach any place or not. Absolute silence commanded everything. It seemed as if everyone had abandoned me. I took refuge in lifeless creatures, a connection between myself and the flow of nature, between myself and the profound darkness that had descended on my soul, was forged. This silence is a type of language that we do not understand. I became dizzy from the intensity of the euphoria. I felt like vomiting, and my legs became weak. I felt an unending weariness in myself. I walked to the cemetery by the side of the road and sat on one of the tombstones. I held my head between my 2 hands and was bewildered by my present state. Suddenly, the sound of a dry, grating laugh brought me to myself. I turned, and seated next to me was a figure whose face was covered with a scarf, and who had something wrapped with a handkerchief under his arm. He turned to me and said, "You must have wanted to go to town. Lost the way, yes? Perhaps you're asking yourself what I'm doing in the graveyard this time of night, but don't be afraid. I deal with the dead. My job is digging graves. It's not a bad job, yes? I know all the nooks and crannies of this place. Just today I went to dig a grave, and this vase came out from under the dirt. You know, it's a rage vase from the ancient city of Re, yes? Please take it. It's nothing. I'll give you this jug so you have something to remember me by." I put my hands in my pocket and pulled out 2 garans and 1 abasi. With a dry, repulsive laugh, the old man said, "Never. It's nothing. I know you. I know where you live as well. I have a carriage hearse right next to here. Let me take you to your house, yes? It's just 2 steps away." He placed the jug in my lap and got up. His shoulders were shaking from the force of laughter. I picked up the jug and followed the hunched figure of the old man. A rickety carriage hearse with 2 skinny black horses stood at the bend in the road. The old man went up and sat in the seat with a particular nimbleness, and I went inside the carriage and lay down in the space that had been especially made for coffins, and rested my head on its ledge so I could look at the scenery. I placed the jug on my chest and held it with my hand. The whip cracked in the air. The horses started moving with laboured breaths. They moved with long and soft leaps, their hooves silently and gently touching the ground. The sound of the bells tied around their necks played a peculiar song in the damp air. The stars from behind the clouds were looking down upon the earth like the pupils of sparkling eyes that have emerged from black, clotted blood. An invigorating tranquillity enveloped me from head to toe, save for the jug pressing on my chest like the corpse of the dead. The trees, intertwined with their crooked and twisted branches, were holding hands, as if they were afraid of stumbling and falling in the dark. Lined up on the side of the road were strange and peculiar houses in cut-up geometrical shapes, with neglected black windows. But the walls of these houses gave off a dull and sickly luminescence, like glowworms. The trees in their frightful state fled from one another and passed by group after group, row after row, but it seemed as if the stems of the morning glories got caught up in their legs, causing them to fall. The smell of the dead, the stench of decomposing flesh overtook my entire being. It was as if the smell of the dead had always been with me, and I had spent my entire life lying in a black coffin, and a humpbacked old man whose face I could not see was moving me in circles between the fog and the passing shadows. The hearse stopped. I picked up the jug and jumped down from the carriage. I was at the front door of my house. I hurriedly entered my room, placed the jug on the table, went and got the tin box, the same tin box that was my till, and which I hid in the closet of my room. I came to the door to give the old carriage driver the box instead of money, but he had vanished. There was no trace of him or his carriage. I once more dejectedly returned to my room, lit the lamp, uncovered the jug, wiped its dirt with my sleeve. The jug had a faded purple, pellucid glaze that had now become the colour of ground-up green-bottle flies, and on one side it was shaped like a diamond with a border of bruised-coloured morning glories, and inside the diamond-shaped border, her face, the face of a woman, was painted, whose eyes were large and black, eyes larger than normal. She had rebuking eyes, as if she had uncovered unforgivable sins in my person that I myself was unaware of. Terrifying and enchanting eyes that were at once restless and bewildered, intimidating and full of promise. These eyes were fear-inducing and alluring, and a supernatural and intoxicating radiance shone from their depths. She had prominent cheeks, a high forehead, slender eyebrows that were conjoined, full-bodied lips that were half open, and hair that was tousled with a single tress hanging over her temple. From inside the tin box I took out the image that I had painted of her face the night before and compared it to the painting on the jug. They were not the least bit different. It was as if they were mirror images of each other. Both were one and essentially the work of a single person, the work of a single hapless painter of pencase covers. Maybe the soul of the jug's painter had transmigrated into me during the act of painting, and my hand had come under his command. They could not be told apart, only mine was on paper, whilst the painting on the jug had a faded, pellucid glaze that had given the image a mystical soul, a strange, unnatural soul, and the spark of this mischievous soul shone from the depths of her eyes. No, it was not believable. Those same large, heedless eyes, that same composed expression, yet unrestrained at the same time. No one can imagine what a feeling it caused in me. I wanted to run away from myself. Was such an occurrence possible? Once more, all the misfortunes of my life materialized before my eyes. Were not the eyes of one person in my life enough? Now 2 people with those same eyes, eyes that belonged to her, were looking at me. No, this was absolutely unbearable. Eyes that themselves were buried near a mountain next to the trunk of a cypress, and by a dried-up river under bruised morning glories, amid thick blood, amid worms, beasts, and biting creatures that were feasting on her, and the roots of plants that would soon penetrate her eye sockets to suck up their juices. These eyes now looked at me with strength, brimming with life. I had not considered myself unfortunate and accursed to such a degree. However, by way of a sense of malefaction that was hidden in me, at the same time an unfamiliar happiness, a reasonless happiness came over me. Because I understood that I had a commiserator from the past. Was not this painter from times past, a painter who painted on this jug hundreds, maybe thousands of years ago, my commiserator? Did not the same worlds pass through me? Until this moment I counted myself as the most miserable of creatures. But I now realized that during the time when on those mountains, in those abandoned villages and houses that were made with heavy mud bricks, a people lived whose bones were now decayed and whose disintegrated parts perhaps now resided in bruised morning glories. Among these people there was one star-crossed painter, one accursed painter. Maybe there did exist a miserable painter of pencase covers like me, exactly like me. And now I realized, I completely understood that he too had liquefied and burned inside of 2 large black eyes, exactly like me. It was this that gave me solace. Finally, I placed my painting next to the painting on the jug. Then I prepared my special brazier. When the charcoals were glowing, I placed it in front of the paintings. I smoked the opium pipe several times, and in a state of euphoria stared at the paintings, for I wanted to gather my thoughts, and it was only the ethereal smoke of opium that could gather my thoughts and cause me to have mental quietude. I smoked all the opium I had left, so that this strange opiate could scatter all the problems and veils that were covering my eyes, all these massing, grey and distant memories. The state of being that I was desirous of arrived, and it exceeded my expectation. Slowly my thoughts became exacting, grand and magical. I entered into a state of half-sleep and half-unconsciousness. Then it was as if the pressure and weight had been lifted from my chest, as if the laws of gravity did not pertain to me, and freely I flew, following my thoughts that had become grand, pure, and minute. A profound and indescribable sense of euphoria enveloped me from head to toe. I had been freed from the shackles of my burdensome body. My entire being had gravitated toward the dull and sluggish realm of a plant. A calm world, but full of invigorating and enchanting forms and colours. Then my stream of thoughts became interrupted and dissolved in these forms and colours. I was drowning in waves full of ethereal caresses. I was hearing the sound of my heart, feeling the movement in my arteries. For me, this state was filled with euphoria and meaning. From the bottom of my heart, I wished and wanted to surrender myself to an amnestic sleep. If this amnesia was possible, if it could last, if once, when my eyes closed, I could effortlessly transcend peaceful sleep and no longer feel my existence. If it was possible to meld my entire being in an ink stain, in a song or a colourful beam of light, and if thereafter these waves and forms could drift and expand to such a degree that they would completely fade and disappear, then I would have realized my wish. Slowly I was overtaken by a numbing, sluggish feeling, as if the rejuvenating fatigue or delicate waves were seeping out of my body. Then I felt that my life was heading in a retrogressive manner. Little by little I saw past conditions and circumstances, erased and forgotten memories from my childhood. Not only did I see, but I also sensed and participated in these struggles. Moment by moment I was becoming smaller and more childlike. Then suddenly my thoughts faded and darkened. It seemed that my entire being was suspended from a narrow hook, hanging at the bottom of a deep and dark pit. Then I was freed from the hook. I was stumbling and spinning, but did not bump into any obstacles. It was an endless abyss in an eternal night. Afterwards, successive obscure and effaced veils formed in front of my eyes. I passed through a moment of absolute amnesia. When I came to, I suddenly found myself in a small room and in a particular state that seemed strange, and at the same time natural to me. In the new world I had woken up into, the surroundings and circumstances were completely intimate and familiar to me, so much so that I was more fond of it than my previous life and surroundings, as if it was the true reflection of my life. Another world, yet it was so connected and familiar to me that it seemed I had returned to my original home. I had been born into an ancient world, yet at the same time more natural and more intimate. It was still twilight. A tallow burner was burning on the mantel in my room. The bedding was on the ground in the corner of the room, but I was awake. I felt that my body was burning, and bloodstains were stuck to my cloak and shawl, that my hands were bloodied. But in spite of the fever and dizziness, a particular feeling of agitation and excitement was born in me that was more intense than the thought of concealing the traces of blood, stronger than the thought of the sheriff coming to arrest me. In any case, I had been waiting to be caught by the sheriff for a long time, but I had decided that before my arrest I should drink down in one gulp the poisonous wine that was on the top shelf. It was the necessity to write that had become, for me, a kind of compulsory duty. I wanted to drag out this demon that had been torturing my insides for some time now. I wanted to bring out my pent-up feelings on paper. Finally, after some hesitation, I pulled the tallow burner closer and started in this manner. I was always of the opinion that silence was the best of things. I was of the opinion that it was better if one could, like the birds by the seaside, spread one's feathers and wings and sit in solitude. But now it is no longer in my hands, for that which should not have come to pass has. Who knows, maybe right now or an hour from now, a band of drunken night watchmen will come to arrest me. I am not the least inclined to save my own hide. Furthermore, there is no room left for denial, even supposing that I can conceal the bloodstains. But before I fall into their hands, I will drink a cupful from the flask of wine, from the wine of my inheritance that I have placed on the top shelf. Now I would like to squeeze the entirety of my life like a bunch of grapes in my hand, and to drip, drop by drop, its juice, nay, its wine, like Abe Torbat, into the parched throat of my shadow. Before I leave, I only want to bring out on paper these pains that have devoured me in the corner of this room, bit by bit, like leprosy or a festering wound. For in this way I can make my thoughts more orderly and organized. Is it my aim to write a will? Never. I have neither money that the court can swallow up, nor religion that the devil can take away. Besides, what on this earth can have the least bit of value for me? That which was life I have lost. I let it and wanted it to slip away, and after I am gone, to hell with it, whether someone reads my scraps of writing or whether they go unread for 70 black years. I only write for this need to write that has now become vital for me. I am in need more than ever. I am in need of connecting my thoughts to my imaginary being, my shadow. This sinister shadow that in front of the light of the tallow burner is bent over on the wall, as if it is carefully reading and devouring that which I write. This shadow must surely understand more than I. I can only talk freely with my own shadow. It is he that induces me to talk. Only he can know me. He surely must understand. As I squeeze drop by drop the juice, nay, the bitter wine of my life into the parched throat of my shadow, I want to say to him, this is my life. Whoever has seen me yesterday saw a hapless and sickly youth, but today they see a humpbacked old man who has white hair, festering eyes, and a hare lip. I am scared of looking out the window of my room, of looking at myself in the mirror, for everywhere I see the multiplied shadows of myself. But in order to describe my life to my bent-over shadow, I need to narrate a story. How many stories about childhood, about love, sexual intercourse, weddings, and death there are, and none of them contain truth. I am tired of stories and verbose phraseology. I will make an effort at squeezing this bunch, but whether or not there is the least bit of truth in it, this I no longer know. I do not know where I am, and whether this patch of sky above my head or this small piece of ground on which I am seated belongs to Nishapur, Balkh, or Benares. In any case, I no longer trust anything. So many contradictory things have I seen, and various words have I heard, and so many times has the sight of my eyes, this thin and hard layer behind which the soul takes refuge, been ground on various surfaces, that now I no longer believe anything. I doubt gravity and the proof of things, the visible and obvious truths of the here and now. If I were to strike my fingers against the stone mortar in the corner of our yard and ask it, "Are you solid and fixed?" and the reply was affirmative, I do not know if I should believe what it had said or not. Am I a distinct and separate creature? I do not know, but just now, as I looked in the mirror, I did not recognize myself. No, that old me is dead. It is decomposed, and yet there are no barriers and impediments between us. I must narrate my story, but I do not know where to begin. My entire life is a story and narrative. I must squeeze the bunch of grapes and pour the juice, spoonful by spoonful, into the parched throat of this old shadow. From where must I begin? For all the thoughts that are presently boiling in my head are from this moment. They are without hour, minute, or history. An incident from yesterday may be older and less moving than an incident from 1,000 years ago. Perhaps it is precisely because my connection to the world of the living has been severed that old memories appear before me. The past, future, hour, day, month, and year are all the same to me. The different stages of childhood, youth, and old age are nothing more than empty words, only for the ordinary people, for the rabble. Rabble with 2 B's. This was the word I was looking for the rabble whose life has stages and a fixed span, like the seasons of a year, for the rabble who live in a temperate area of life. But my life has always had one season and one state, as if in a cold clime in the eternal darkness of the past, whilst a flame has always burned inside my body, melting me like a candle. Between the 4 walls that make up my room and the fence erected around my thoughts and existence, My life melts bit by bit like a candle. No, I am mistaken. It is like a wet log that lies in the corner of the fireplace, charred and roasted by the fire of the other wood, neither burnt nor untouched. It has merely suffocated from the smoke and steam of others. My room, like all rooms, has been made with baked and sun-dried bricks on top of the ruins of thousands of ancient houses. It is whitewashed and has a border of inscriptions. It precisely resembles a tomb. The minutest details of my room, such as the cobwebs in the corner of the wall, are enough to busy my thoughts for many long hours, because since I have become bedridden, they have not attended to my affairs as much. The horseshoe nail that has been pounded in the wall was the place for the nanu of my wife and I, and perhaps even later it bore the weight of other children. A little below the nail, a slab of the plaster has come off, and from under it, the odour of creatures and things that have previously inhabited this room can be smelled, such that until now no current or breeze has been able to dispel this thick, lingering and obstinate stench, the smell of body sweat, the smell of past ailments, the odours of the mouth, the smell of feet, the acrid smell of urine, the stink of putrid oil, rotting straw mat, burnt omelettes, the smell of fried onions, the smell of duchades, the smell of mallow and a child's mamazie, the smell of the room of a boy who has just reached puberty, fumes from the street and the stench of the dead, or those in the throes of death. All of these are still alive and have held on to their distinctive marks. There are also many other smells whose source and origins are unclear, but that have none the less left their impression. My room has one dark closet and 2 windows that lead to the outside, to the world of the rabble. One of them opens to our yard and the other faces the alley, and from there it connects me to the city of Ray, a city which they call the Bride of the World, and which has thousands of interconnecting alleyways and dilapidated houses, schools and caravanserais. A city which is considered the greatest city of the world lives and breathes behind my room. Here, by the side of my room, when I close my eyes, the jumbled and hidden shadows of the city, that which has affected me, with its palaces, mosques and gardens, all appear before my eyes. These 2 windows connect me to the outside world, to the world of the rabble. However, in my room, on the wall, there is a mirror with which I look at my face, and in my confined existence this mirror is more important than the world of the rabble, which has nothing to do with me. Of all the views of the city, a lowly butcher's shop that finishes off 2 sheep a day is right in front of my window. Every time I look out the window I see the butcher. Each morning they bring 2 thin, black pack horses with the carcasses of sheep hanging on both sides to the front of the store. Consumptive pack horses that give deep, dry coughs and have withered legs that end in hooves, as if according to some barbaric law their hands were cut off and dipped in boiling oil. The butcher strokes his henna-dyed beard with his greasy hands. First he inspects the carcasses of the sheep with a buyer's eye, then picks 2 from the pile, weighs their fatty tails in his hands, and takes them inside and hangs them on the hook. With laboured breaths the pack horses start to move. Then these bloody carcasses with slit throats, gaping eyes and bloody eyelids that protrude from their bruised sockets. The butcher takes and rubs them, caresses them, then he picks up a bone-handled jackknife and carefully cuts up their bodies, and with a smile sells the boneless meat to his customers. All of these things he carries out with such pleasure. I am certain he also experiences some sort of intoxication and euphoria, that yellow bully of a dog that has staked out our neighbourhood and who always looks enviously at the butcher's hands with a crooked neck and innocent eyes. That dog too knows all of these things. That dog too knows that the butcher takes pleasure in his work. A little further underneath an archway there sits a strange old man whose wares are laid out before him. On the sofa he has placed a sickle, 2 horseshoes, several different kinds of coloured beads, a jackknife, a mousetrap, a pair of rusty pliers, a dropper for adding water to an inkwell, a comb with missing teeth, a trowel and a glazed jug with a dirty handkerchief placed on top of it. Hours, days, months, I have peered at him from behind the window. He sits in a peculiar way, always with his grimy scarf, camel-coloured robe, an open collar which has his white chest hairs sticking out from it, with festering eyelids that are being devoured by an unrelenting and impudent ailment, and a talisman wrapped around his bicep. Only on Thursday nights does he read, teeth yellow and missing from the Koran. Perhaps thus he earns his daily bread, for I have never seen anyone buy anything from him. It is as if this man's face has been in most of the nightmares that I have seen. Behind his lumpy and shaved head, wrapped in a cream-coloured turban, behind his small forehead, what foolish and stubborn thoughts like weeds are cropping up. Perhaps the sofa and the odds and ends in front of the old man have a particular relationship to his life. Several times I have decided to go and have a talk with him or buy something from him, but I have not dared. My nanny told me that this man had been a potter in his youth and only kept this one jug for himself, and now earned his daily bread from peddling. These were my connections to the outside world. Now concerning the inner world, my nanny and a whore of a woman were all that were left for me. But Nana June was her nanny also. She was nanny to both of us, for not only were my wife and I close relatives, but Nana June also nursed us at the same time. Essentially, my mother was her mother also. Basically, I have never seen my mother and father, and it was her mother, that tall woman with grey hair, that raised me. It was her mother that I loved like my own mother, and it was because of this love that I took her daughter as my wife. I have heard several accounts about my mother and father. Only one of these accounts, which I have heard from Nana June, do I imagine to be true. Nana June told me that my father and uncle were identical twins. Both had the same figure, features and character, and even their voices were the same, so that telling one apart from the other was no easy task. In addition, there existed a psychic connection and a sense of empathy between them, meaning that if one was not feeling well, the other would become unwell also. As people would say, like an apple that has been cut in two. In the end, both of them take up work as merchants and, at the age of 20, travelled to India, taking with them and selling goods from Ray, various textiles, monera, floral patterned cloths, cotton cloths, jobes, shawls, needles, ceramic bowls, gel sachur, and pen case covers. My father was in the city of Benares, and he used to send my uncle for business to other cities in India. After a while, my father falls in love with a virgin Bogam Dasi girl, a dancer at the temple of Lingam. Performing religious dances in front of the large statue of Lingam and caring for the temple were the duties of this girl, a warm-blooded, olive-skinned girl with lemon-shaped breasts, large, slanted eyes, thin eyebrows that were connected, between which she placed a red dot. Now I imagine that Bogam Dasi, meaning my mother, bare-chested, with a gold-embroidered silk sari, silken headband, thick and black hair like the eternal dark night, tied in a knot in the back, with bracelets and anklets, a gold nose ring, sparkling teeth, large black eyes, slanted and half-drunk, would dance with slow and graceful movements to the song of the sitar and tombak, lute and cymbals and horn, a slow and droning song that would be played by naked turbaned men, a profound song that would have captured the entirety of the mysteries of the magic and superstition and lust and suffering of the peoples of India, and by means of symmetric movements and sexual innuendo, sanctified movements, Bogum Dasi would open like a flower's petal, giving a quiver over her entire shoulders and arms, bending and again closing in on herself. These movements that embodied a particular meaning and that were uttered without speaking. What effect could they have on my father, especially considering that the sensuality of this scene was only heightened by the smell of her acrid and peppery sweat mixed with the scent of champak and sandalwood oil, a scent that carries the smell of the sap of faraway trees and which gives life to distant and suppressed sensations. The smell of a medicine chest, the smell of medicines from India that are kept in a nursery, unfamiliar oils from a land filled with meaning and ancient rituals and customs. These must have given the odour to my Jushandes. All of these awakened the distant and forgotten memories of my father. My father was so enamoured by Bogum Dasi that he adopts the dancer girl's religion, the Lingam religion. But after a while, when the girl becomes pregnant, they expel her from the temple's service. I had just been born when my uncle returned from his trip to Benares. However, it seemed that his taste and love were one with my father's. He falls in love with my mother not once, but 100 times over, and in the end he fools her, for the similarity in looks and personality that he had with my father made this an easy task. As soon as the affair is discovered, my mother says that she will leave them both unless my uncle and father undergo the Naja snake trial, and she will belong to whoever survives. The trial was arranged such that my uncle and father were to be thrown in a dark room like a black hole with the Naja snake, and whomever the snake should bite would naturally cry out. Then the snake charmer would open the door to the room and save the other, and Bogum Dasi would belong to him. Before they are cast into the black hole, my father entreats Bogum Dasi to dance, to perform the sacred dance of the temple before him once more. She agrees and dances to the song of the snake charmer's flute in front of the torchlight, with meaningful movements that were elegant and slithery, twisting and turning like a Naja snake. Then they throw my father and my uncle in the special room with the Naja snake. Instead of a frightful cry, a moan mixed with repulsive laughter is heard, a maniacal cry. When they open the door, my uncle comes out of the room, but his face appears old and broken, and the hair on his head, because of the intensity of fright and horror, the sound of the slithering and hissing of the angry snake that had sparkling round eyes and venom-filled fangs, and whose body consisted of a long neck that ended on a small head and a protuberance that resembled a spoon. Because of the intensity of fear, my uncle leaves the room with white hair. According to the promise and agreement, Bogum Dasi now belonged to my uncle. One frightful thing, it was not known whether the person who survived the trial was my father or uncle, for at the completion of this trial, a disturbance of his mental faculties had resulted. He had utterly forgotten his former life and did not recognize the baby. For this reason, they imagined him to be my uncle. Are not all these stories relevant to my life? Have not the echo of this repulsive laughter and the horror of this trial left their impression on me? And are they not relevant to me? From henceforth I was nothing more than a stranger, an extra mouth to feed. In the end, my uncle or father, for work related to trade, returns with Bogum Dasi to the city of Ray, and leaves me under the care of his sister, who is my aunt. My nanny told me that while my mother was saying her goodbyes, she entrusts my aunt with a purple flask of wine, in which there is dissolved the venom of the fangs of the Naja, the Indian snake. What better keepsake can a Bogum Dasi leave her child? Red wine, the elixir of death that grants eternal tranquility. Perhaps she too had squeezed her life like a bunch of grapes and offered its wine to me. From the same poison that killed my father, now I understand what a precious gift she has given. Is my mother alive? Perhaps, as I am busy writing, she is in the Maidan of a far-off city in India, dancing, twisting and turning like a snake in the torchlight, as if a Naja snake has bitten her, with curious and naked men, women and children encircling her, while my father or uncle, hunched back with his white hair, is sitting on the edge of the Maidan, looking at her, remembering the black hole, the slithering and hissing of the angry snake that raises its head, whose eyes sparkle and whose neck turns into a hood, revealing a dark grey line similar to eyeglasses on the back of its neck. In any case, I was a nursing baby when they placed me in the arms of this same Nana June, and Nana June also nursed my aunt's daughter, this same whore of mine, and I was raised by my aunt, that tall lady with the grey hair hanging over her temple, in this same house with her daughter, this same whore. As soon as I came to know myself, I took my aunt for my mother and loved her. So much did I love her that later, when her daughter, my Shiri sister, came to resemble her, I took her as my wife. I mean to say I was forced to marry her. Only once did this girl surrender herself to me. I will never forget it, and it was by her mother's deathbed. Much of the night had passed. As soon as all of the people in the house had fallen asleep, in order to say my final farewell, I got up while in my undergarments and went to the dead's room. I saw 2 spermaceti candles burning over her head. They had placed a Koran on her stomach to prevent Satan from penetrating her body. When I moved aside the cloth covering her face, I saw my aunt with her usual dignified and attractive appearance. It was as if all earthly concerns had left her face, an expression that somehow made me want to bow before her, yet at the same time death seemed to me a natural and normal event. A mocking grin had frozen on the edge of her lips. I wanted to kiss her hands and exit the room, but as I turned around, I was surprised to see this same whore, who is now my wife, enter the room. And in front of her mother's corpse, with what lust did she press herself against me, pulling me towards herself, and what wet kisses was she giving me? I wanted to sink into the ground from the weight of shame, but I did not know what to do. The dead, with its teeth jutting out, seemed to be mocking us. I thought that the calm expression of the lips of the dead had changed. I involuntarily pulled her into my arms and kissed her, but at this moment the drapes of the adjoining room were pulled aside, and my aunt's husband, the father of this same whore, entered the room, hunched over and wearing a scarf. He gave out a dry, grating and repulsive laugh that made the hairs on one's body stand on end. So hard that his shoulders were shaking, but he did not look in our direction. I wanted to sink into the ground from the weight of shame, and if I could, I would have given the dead a hard slap in the face for the mocking way she was looking at us. What a disgrace! I ran out of the room in a fit, because of this very whore. Perhaps she had arranged all this so I would be forced to marry her. Despite the fact that we were Shiri brother-sister, in order for them to save face, I was forced to marry her. For this girl was not a virgin. I was not aware of this fact either. There was no way for me to know. It was only hinted at. That night of the wedding, when we were alone in the room, no matter how much I begged and pleaded, it had no effect on her, and she would not undress. She would only say, "Binamazam." She did not allow me to come close to her. She turned off the light and slept on the other side of the room. She was shaking like a weeping willow, as if they had thrown her in some dark hole with a serpent. No one will believe this, meaning it is not believable. She did not allow me to kiss her once on the lips. On the second night, I returned to my spot on the floor from the first night, and the following nights were the same. I did not move. In the end, much time had passed with me sleeping on the floor on the other side of the room. Who can believe that? For 2 months, no, 2 months and 4 days I slept on the ground far from her, and did not dare to move closer to her. She had taken care of that pretentious handkerchief beforehand, placing pigeon's blood on it. I do not know. Perhaps it was the same handkerchief she had saved from her first night of love-making, in order to make a bigger fool out of me. At the same time, everyone was congratulating me, winking at me, and in their hearts they must have been saying, "He conquered the fort last night." And I pretended not to hear. They were laughing at me, laughing at my stupidity. I had made a promise to myself that one day I would write all of this down. After I found out that she had an assortment of lovers, and that maybe she disliked me for the fact that an Ahkoond had made her my possession by reciting a few Arabic words in her ears, I thought that maybe she wanted to be free. Finally, one night I decided that I would go to her by force. I acted on my decision, but after a hard struggle she got up and left, and on that night I was content to roll around and sleep in the bed into which her body heat had penetrated and which smelled like her. The only restful sleep I had was on that night. From that night on, she forced us to have separate rooms. At night, when I returned to the house, she would still not be back. I did not know whether she had come or not. I did not even want to know, for I was condemned to loneliness, sentenced to death. I wanted to come into contact with her lovers by any means possible. Surely no one will believe this. Whomever I heard that she liked, I would observe. I would subject myself to 1,000 different kinds of humiliation and debasement to become acquainted with them. I would flatter them and bring them for her, and what lovers they were. A tripe peddler, an Islamic jurist, a Jirachi, a head sheriff, a well-digger, a merchant, a philosopher. Their names and titles were different, yet they are all pupils of the Kalapaz. All of them she preferred to me. No one will believe with what baseness and degeneracy I belittled and denigrated myself. Because I feared I was losing my wife, I wanted to learn the manners and sexual charm of my wife's lovers. But I was the wretched pimp whom all the fools laughed at. How could I ever have learned the ways and manners of the rabble? Now I understand. She liked them because they were impudent, dull, and malodorous. Her love, in essence, was at one with filth and death. Was I truthfully inclined to sleep with her? Was I attracted to the appearance of her face or her loathing of me? Or was it her mannerisms and coquetry? Or the love and affection I held for her mother since my childhood? Or had all these come together and acted as one? No, I do not know. I only know one thing. This woman, this whore, this witch, I do not know what poison she poured into my soul, my being, for not only did I want her, but every particle of my body needed every particle of her body. It cried out, this need, and I used to fervently wish that I would be with her on a lost island where human beings did not exist. I used to wish that an earthquake or hurricane or thunderbolt from the sky would blow up all the rabble that were breathing, moving and caressing behind the walls of my room, and that only she and I would remain. Would she not even then prefer another creature, an Indian snake or a serpent, to me? I used to wish that I could spend one night with her, and that we would die together in each other's arms. It seemed to me that this would be the supreme consummation of my life and existence. It seemed as if this whore took pleasure and delight in my being tortured, as if the pain that was gnawing away at me was not enough. In the end, I fell out of work and the hustle and bustle and became housebound. Like the moving dead, no one knew of the secret between us. My old nanny, who had become a companion in my slow death, used to reproach me. It was because of this same whore that behind my back I used to hear them whisper to each other, "How can this poor woman put up with her crazy husband?" They were in the right, for the degree to which I had become feeble was not believable. Day by day I became gaunter. When I looked at myself in the mirror, my cheeks were red, the colour of the meat in front of the butcher's shop. My body was hot, and my eyes had acquired a drunken and sad expression. I took pleasure in this new state of mine, and had seen the haze of death in my eyes. I had seen that I had to depart. In the end, they sent word to Hakim Bashi, the doctor of the rabble, the family doctor who, in his own words, raised us. He entered with his cream-coloured turban and his 3 fists long beard. He was proud of the fact that he had given my grandfather medicine to strengthen his virility, that he poured rocket seed and rock candy down my throat and forced kasha upon my father's sister. Anyway, as soon as he arrived, he sat at my bedside, took my pulse, looked at my tongue, instructed me to drink barley water and the milk of a she-donkey, and to fumigate with frankincense and orpiment twice a day. He gave my nanny several long prescriptions which consisted of jushande and strange oils and extracts, such as hyssop, olive, lilies of the valley, camphor, maidenhair, chamomile oil, goose oil, linseed, fir tree seeds, and other such nonsense. My condition worsened. It was only my nanny. It was her nanny too, with her weathered face and grey hair, who would sit by my bedside in the corner of the room, rubbing cold water on my forehead, bringing me jushandes. She would speak of the various episodes and different aspects of my and that whore's childhood. For example, she would tell me that ever since she was in the Nanu, my wife had a habit of chewing on the fingernails of her left hand. She would chew so much that they would become raw. And sometimes she would tell a story. It seemed to me these tales turned back my age and created in me the state of a child, for they were related to the memories of that period. When I was very small and in the room in which my wife and I lay next to each other in the Nanu, a large 2-person Nanu, I precisely remember she would tell these very same stories, parts of these stories that in the past I did not believe because they seemed incredible, now seemed the natural state of affairs. Because illness created a whole new world within me, an unfamiliar and obtuse world, full of scenes and colours and longings that cannot be imagined in a state of perfect health, and because I felt within me the trials and tribulations of these stories with an inexplicable pleasure and anxiety. I felt that I had become a child, and now, as I am busy writing, I am partaking in these feelings. All these feelings belong to the present and not the past. Perhaps the actions, thoughts, wishes, and habits of the peoples of the past that had been transferred to later generations via these stories were one of the necessities of life. For thousands of years they have spoken of these same things, performed these same sexual acts, have had these same childish worries. Is not the entirety of life one absurd story, one unbelievable and foolish tale? Am I not writing my own fable and tale? A story is nothing more than a way of escaping unfulfilled dreams, dreams that have not been reached, dreams that each storyteller has imagined according to their own inherited and constrained state of mind. I wish I could go back to the time when I was an oblivious child and gradually fall asleep, a peaceful sleep without disturbance. When I would wake up, my cheeks would become red, the colour of the meat hanging in front of the butcher's shop. My body was hot, and I was coughing. What deep, frightful coughs, coughs such that it was uncertain from which forgotten crevice of my body they were coming out of, like the coughs of the pack-horses that bring the carcasses of the sheep to the butchers in the early morning. I precisely remember it was pitch black. For several minutes I was in a comatose state. Before I fell asleep I was talking to myself. In this moment I was certain that I had become a child and was sleeping in the Nanu. I sensed that there was someone near me. Some time had passed since everyone in the house had fallen asleep. It was close to daybreak, and the ailing know that this is the time that life is dragged back from the brink of the world. My heart was furiously beating, but I had no fear. My eyes were open, but I did not see anyone, for it was a very thick and compact darkness. Several minutes passed. An unpleasant thought came to me, and I told myself, maybe it's her. At the same moment I felt a cool hand being placed on my burning forehead. I was trembling and asked myself 2 or 3 times whether or not this was the hand of Azrael. And I fell asleep. In the morning when I awoke, my nanny said that my daughter, meaning my wife, that whore, had come to my bedside and placed my head on her lap and rocked me like a baby. Perhaps a motherly nurturing feeling had awakened in her. I wish I had died in that moment. Maybe the child she was pregnant with has died. Had her child been born? I do not know. In this room that moment by moment was becoming darker and more cramped than a grave, I was constantly on the lookout for my wife, but she never came. Was it not because of her that I had been reduced to such a state? It is not a joke. 3 years. No, it was 2 years and 4 months. But what are days and months? They have no meaning for me. The meaning of time is lost to one who is in the grave. This room was the tomb of my thoughts and life, all the activity, the noises and all the pretensions of the lives of others, the lives of the rabble that were physically and mentally constructed in the same manner, seemed strange and meaningless to me. From the time I was bedridden, I had awakened into a strange and unbelievable world in which I had no need for the world of the rabble, a world that was within me, a world full of unknowns, and it was as if I was forced to examine and inspect all its cracks and crevices. At night, when my existence fluttered on the brink of 2 worlds, a little before the time I plunged into a deep and vacuous sleep, I would dream. With one blink of the eye I was traversing the life of another, not my own. I was breathing a different air, and I was far away, as if I wanted to escape from myself and change my destiny. When I closed my eyes, my real world was revealed to me. These scenes had a life of their own, freely vanishing and reappearing as if my desire had no effect on them. But I am not certain of this. The scenes that appeared before me were not ordinary dreams, for I had yet to fall asleep. In silence and tranquillity I separated these scenes and compared them to each other. It seemed to me that I had not known myself until now, and the way in which I had viewed the world until now had lost its strength and meaning, and in its place the darkness of the night ruled, for they had not taught me to peer at the night and to love the night. I do not know at this time whether or not my arm was under my control. I thought that if I left my arm to its own devices by an unknown and unidentifiable force, it would start working without my being able to take control of or interfere with its movements. Had I not continuously looked after my body, and had I unconsciously not been aware it was capable of doing things that I had no expectation of? For a long time this feeling was born in me that I was decomposing, alive. Not only my body but also my soul always stood contrary to my heart, and they never were in agreement. I was perpetually undergoing a strange and particular kind of dissolution and decomposition. At times I thought of things that I could not believe myself. At times a sense of pity was born in me, whilst my mind began to mock me. Often, when I was talking to someone or doing something, I would enter into the intricacies of the subject while my attention was elsewhere. My thoughts were elsewhere, and in my heart I would be cursing at myself. I was a mass in the midst of dissolution and decomposition. Perhaps it was always like this, and shall forever be, a strange, inharmonious mixture. What is unbearable is that despite feeling distant from all these people whom I saw and lived amongst, we were connected by a superficial resemblance, a remote and faint, yet at the same time close resemblance. It was these shared necessities of life that diminished my astonishment. The resemblance that tortured me more than any other was that the rabble fancied this whore my wife just as I did, and that she was more fond of them. I am certain that there was a deficiency in one of our beings. I have named her whore, for no other name suits her so well. I do not want to say my wife, because the husband-wife relationship did not exist between us, and I would be lying to myself. I have always from the first day called her whore, but this name had a special attractiveness. If I married her, it was because she came to me first, and that was due to her cunning and deception. No, she did not love me. Essentially, how was it possible for her to fall in love with anyone? A sensual woman who needed one man for lusting, one man for love-making, and one man for torturing. I do not think she contented herself with this trinity, but she had certainly chosen me for torturing, and in truth she could not have chosen better. But I married her because she resembled her mother, because she had a remote and faint resemblance to myself. Now, not only was I attracted to her, but every particle of my body longed for her, particularly my loins. For I do not want to hide true feelings under the cover of fanciful words of love and affection and divinity, for I have no taste for literary Hosvartion. I believed that some kind of luminescence or halo, like the kind that they draw around the heads of prophets, fluttered in my body, and perhaps my sickly and ailing halo sought hers, the halo that was in her body, and pulled at it with all its might. When my health improved, I decided to leave, to go and lose myself, like a leper dog that knows it must die, like the birds that hide as they are dying. I awoke early in the morning, put on my clothes, picked up 2 kaluchas that were on the shelf, and fled the house in a way no one would find out. I ran from the misery that had taken hold of me. I passed through the alleys unhindered, without a particular destination. I passed by the rabble who all had avaricious faces and who chased money and carnality. I did not need to see them, for one of them was a representative for all. They were all one mouth connected to a heap of intestines which ended in their reproductive organs. Suddenly I felt more nimble and light. The muscles of my legs had started with a special agility and speed that I could not have imagined. I felt that I had been freed from the shackles of existence. I raised my shoulders. This was a natural habit of mine. In my childhood, I used to do the same motion whenever I was freed from a particular duty or task. The sun was rising and it was burning. I found myself in deserted alleys. Along my path, grey houses with strange and peculiar shapes could be seen. Cubes, prisons, and cones with dark and squat entrances. These openings seemed to be without doors or fastenings, temporary and without owners, as if no living creature could ever dwell in these houses. The sun, like a golden razor, was carving and then removing the edge of the shadows on the wall. The alleys were elongating between the old, whitened walls. Silence and tranquility were everywhere, as if the elements had obeyed the sacred law of the tranquility of the scorching atmosphere, the law of silence. It seemed that there were hidden secrets everywhere, so much so that my lungs did not dare draw a breath. Suddenly I became aware that I had exited the city gates. The heat of the sun, with 1,000 sucking mouths, was drawing out my body's sweat. The desert bushes had turned the colour of turmeric under the blazing sun. The sun, like a feverish eye, was showering its burning rays from the ends of the sky onto the desolate and lifeless landscape, but the soil and plants here had a particular smell. This odour was so strong that upon smelling it I reminisced about my own childhood. Not only did I imagine the events and conversations from that time, but I also sensed a moment of it in myself, as if it had happened yesterday. It caused an agreeable kind of dizziness in me, as if I had been born again into a lost world. This sensation had an inebriating effect, and like a sweet, aged wine it penetrated my nerves and vasculature to the depths of my being. In the desert I recognized the thorns, rocks, tree trunks, and small shrubs of time. I recognized the familiar fragrance of the fields. I remembered my own long-forgotten days, but all these remembrances had magically become distanced from me, and those memories now had a separate life of their own. While I was but an unfortunate and distant witness, and I felt that a deep whirlpool had been formed between myself and them, I felt that my present-day heart was empty, and that the shrubs had lost their enchanting scent of yesteryear. The cypress trees had become more spaced apart. The hills had become drier. The being that I was at the time no longer existed, and if I could bring him back and talk to him, he could not hear or understand me. He had the face of a person that I once knew, but who was not me, or a part of me. The world seemed to be an empty and woeful house, and in my chest an anxiety was swirling, as if now I was forced to inspect all the rooms of this house with bare feet. I would go through interconnecting rooms, but when I would reach the last room facing that whore, all the doors behind me would spontaneously shut, leaving only walls with hidden corners and trembling shadows. They would patrol around me like male and female black slaves. When I neared the Suren River, a bare, dry mountain appeared. The parched and rigid figure of the mountain reminded me of my nanny. I do not know what connection there was between the two. I passed by the mountain. I reached a small and scenic area that was surrounded by mountains. The ground was covered with patches of bruised morning glories, and on top of the mountain a tall fort that had been made from heavy mud bricks was visible. I felt tired at this moment. I went by the bank of the Suren River and sat on the sand, under the shade of an aged cypress tree. It was a pleasant and secluded area. It seemed as if until now no one had set foot in this area. Suddenly I took notice. I saw a small girl come out from behind the cypress tree and go towards the fort. She was wearing a black dress that had been woven with an extremely thin and light warp and woof, perhaps silk. She was chewing the fingernail of her left hand, and she was gliding, passing by with carefree and easy movements. It seemed to me that I had seen her before and knew her, but from this far a distance, under the rays of the sun, I could not tell how she suddenly disappeared. I was frozen in place without being able to make the slightest movement. But this time I had seen her pass in front of me with my own eyes and then disappear. Was she an actual being or an illusion? Had I been dreaming or awake? No matter how much I tried to remember, it was useless. I felt a particular trembling in my spine. It seemed to me that in this hour all the shadows of the fort that were cast upon the mountain had come to life, and that the small girl was one of the former inhabitants of the ancient city of Ray. The scene that was before me seemed at once familiar. I remembered a Sadegh from my childhood when we had come to this place. My mother-in-law and that whore were also there. How we played that day and run after each other behind these same cypress trees. Then a group of other kids that I cannot remember precisely joined us. We were playing Samamak, and one time when I was going after this whore, it was near this same Suren river. Her leg wobbled and she fell in the river. They brought her out, took her behind the cypress tree to change her clothes. I followed after her. They were holding a prayer veil in front of her, but I furtively saw her entire body from behind the tree. She was smiling and chewing on the index finger on her left hand. Then they wrapped a white cloak around her body and laid out in the sun her black silken dress that had been woven with a thin warp and woof. Finally, I lay on the sand at the foot of the old cypress tree. The sound of the water, like choppy and unintelligible speech that murmurs in the realm of sleep, was reaching my ears. I involuntarily sank my hands into the warp and damp sand. I was squeezing the warm and damp sand in my fists. It was like the firm flesh of a girl's body who has fallen in the water and changed her clothes. I do not know how much time passed. When I got up, I unconsciously started to walk. It was quiet and still everywhere. I was moving, but I did not see my surroundings. A force that was beyond my control was compelling me to move. All of my attention was focused on my own steps. I was not walking, but, like that black-clad girl, I was gliding on my feet and passing by. As soon as I came to, I saw that I was in town, and in front of my father-in-law's house. I do not know why I ended up at my father-in-law's house. His son, my brother-in-law, was sitting on the bench. He and his sister were like an apple that has been cut in two. He had slanted Turkoman eyes, prominent cheeks, wheat-coloured complexion, a sensuous nose, and a thin and strong face. And as he sat there, the index finger of his left hand was in his mouth. I unconsciously went forward, took out the kaluches that were in my pocket and gave them to him, and said, "Shajun gave these for you." For he called my wife, instead of his own mother, Shajun. He hesitantly held the kaluches in his hand and gazed wondrously at them with his Turkoman eyes. I sat on the bench, placed him in my lap, and pressed him against myself. His body was warm, and his calves were the same as my wife's calves, and he had the same relaxed mannerisms that she had. His lips resembled his father's, but that which in his father caused a feeling of repulsion in me was quite the opposite in him. Seeming charismatic and attractive, it was as if his half-open lips had just separated from a long, warm kiss. I kissed his half-open mouth because it looked similar to my wife's. His lips tasted like the end of a cucumber, acrid and bitter. Perhaps the lips of that whore had this same taste. At the same time I saw his father, that hump-backed old man who was wearing a scarf, exit the door of the house. He passed by without looking at me, laughing convulsively. So hard was he laughing that his shoulders were shaking. It was a frightful laugh that made the hairs on one's body stand on end. I wanted to sink into the ground from the weight of shame. It was nearing dusk. I stood up. It was as if I wanted to escape from myself. Unconsciously, I started on my way home. I did not see anyone or anything. It seemed to me that I was moving through an unfamiliar and foreign city. All around me there were strange and peculiar houses, in cut-up geometrical shapes, with bleak black windows, as if no living creature could ever dwell in these houses. But their white walls shone with an unearthly light, and what was strange, What I could not believe was that when I stood opposite each of these walls, in front of the moonlight, my shadow would fall upon the wall, thick and enormous, but it was without a head. My shadow was headless. I had heard that if the shadow of a person cast upon a wall was headless, they would die by the year's end. I entered my house in an anxious state and sought the refuge of my room. At the same time, my nose started to bleed, and after a large amount of blood came out of my nose, I fell unconscious on my bed. My nanny began to look after me. Before I fell asleep, I looked at my face in the mirror. I saw that my face looked broken, faint, and lifeless. It was so faded that I did not recognize myself. I got into bed, pulled the quilt over my head, turned, faced the wall, curled up my legs, closed my eyes, and continued where I had left off without my thoughts. Those threads that made up my dark, depressing, horrific, and intoxicating destiny. That place where life intertwines with death and distorted images are born. Long, extinguished and bygone desires, strangled and buried desires again come to life and scream revenge. At this time I was torn from nature and the illusory world, and was willing to be destroyed and obliterated in the current of eternity. Several times I whispered to myself, "Death, death, where are you?" It was this that soothed me, and I fell asleep. After my eyes closed, I saw that I was in Mohammedia Maidan. They had erected a high gallows and had hung on the gallows tree the old peddler who always sat in front of my room. Several drunken policemen were drinking wine at the foot of the gallows. My mother-in-law, with a blazing expression, with an expression I have seen on my wife's face when she is angry, with her lips blanched and her pupils round and horrified, was pulling my hand, guiding me through the crowd, pointing me out to the hangman dressed in red and saying, "Hang this one too." I woke up from sleep in a state of fright. I was burning like an oven. My body was drenched in sweat, and a stinging heat was flaming across my cheeks. In order to rid myself of this nightmare, I got up and drank some water and splashed some on my face. I lay down again, but sleep did not come to my eyes. In the shadows and light of the room, I was staring at the jug of water that was on the top shelf. It seemed to me that as long as the jug of water was on the top shelf, I would not fall asleep. I was overtaken by an irrational fear that the jug was going to fall. I got up to secure the jug, but by an invisible force that I was unaware of, my hand deliberately hit the jug, and the jug fell and broke. Finally, I forced shut my eyelids, but I thought that my nanny had gotten up and was looking at me. I balled up my fists under the blanket, but nothing out of the ordinary had happened. In a state of unconsciousness, I heard the sounds of the front door. I heard the sound of my nanny, who dragged her slippers on the ground as she went to get bread and cheese. Then came the faraway sounds of a merchant who was shouting, "Mulberries, it cuts through bile." No, life, tiring as usual, had begun. It was growing lighter. As I opened my eyes, a patch of reflected light from the surface water of the hose that had come through the window was cast upon the ceiling and flickering. It seemed to me that last night's dream had become so faint and distant, as if I had seen it years ago when I was a child. My nanny brought my breakfast. Her face looked as if it had been reflected off an Aeneid deck. So long and skinny it seemed to me. It took an unbelievably comical form, as if a heavy weight was dragging down her face. Even though Nana June knew that the hookah's smoke was bad for me, she still smoked the hookah in my room. As a matter of fact, she was not in good spirits until she smoked the hookah. So much had my nanny told me about her house, her son and daughter-in-law, that she had made me a partner in her avid pleasures. How absurd it was. Sometimes for no reason I would think about the lives of the people in my nanny's house. But I do not know why any sort of happiness and the lives of others made me nauseous. While I knew that my life was over and was slowly flickering out in a painful way, why should I direct my thoughts to the lives of the idiots and rabble? What relevance did they have to me? They who were healthy, ate well, slept well, and fornicated well, and who had never felt the slightest twinge of my pain, and whose faces had not been continuously caressed by the wings of death. Nana June treated me like a child. She wanted to see my entire soul. I still felt shy in front of my wife. When she entered my room, I would cover the phlegm that I had spit in the basin, comb my hair and beard, and tidy up my appearance. But in front of my nanny I had no shyness whatsoever. Why did this woman, who had no relation to me, involve herself with my life to such a degree? I remember that in this very room they would set up the corsi over the system in the winter-time. My nanny and I, with this same whore, would sleep around the corsi. Between the light and dark, when my eyes opened, the pattern of the embroidered curtain that was hanging in the doorway would come to life. What a strange and terrifying curtain it was! On it a hump-backed old man resembling a Hindu yogi was sitting cross-legged underneath the cypress tree and carrying an instrument similar to a sitar, and a beautiful young girl like Bogam Darcy, a dancer of the temples of India. They had fastened her hands as if she was forced to dance in front of the old man. I used to think that by being thrown into a black hole with a Naja snake, the old man's appearance had transformed, and his hair and beard had turned white. Perhaps my father or uncle had sent one such gold-embroidered Indian curtain from faraway lands. When I focused too much on this object, I would become scared. I would wake up my sleepy nanny, and with her bad breath and coarse black hair brushing against my face, she would hold me tight. In the morning, when I opened my eyes, she appeared to look the same, only the lines on her face had become deeper and harder. Often, in order to forget, in order to escape from myself, I will reminisce about my childhood so that I may feel the way I did prior to becoming ill, feel that I am healthy. I still felt that I was a child, but that for my death, for my extinction, there was a second breath that would feel pity for my plight, for the plight of this child that was about to die. During the terrible times of my life, as soon as I saw the tranquil face of my nanny, as soon as I saw her pale face, motionless and opaque, deep-set eyes, thin nostrils and broad, bony forehead, the remembrances of those days would awaken in me. Perhaps mysterious beams were emanating from her, causing a tranquility in me. She had a fleshy mole that was hairy on her temple. It seems that it was only on this day that I noticed her mole. Previously, when I looked at her face, I did not pay such close attention. Although Nana June had outwardly changed, her thoughts had remained the same. She only showed more of an attachment to life and a fear of death, like the flies that seek refuge indoors at the beginning of autumn. But my life was changing, every day and every minute. It seemed to me that the several years' time that it might take for a change to take place in a person multiplied and sped up 1,000 times for me, while conversely, its pleasure was heading towards zero and perhaps even sinking below zero. There are those who start their death throes at the age of 20, while many others begin to extinguish only while dying, very calmly and quietly, like a tallow burner whose oil has run out. At noontime, when my nanny brought my lunch, I slapped the underside of the ash bowl and screamed. I screamed with all my might. The entire household gathered in front of my room. That whore also came and quickly passed by. I looked at her belly. It was swollen. No, she had not delivered yet. They went and called Hakim Bashi. I was pleased with myself that at the very least I was causing trouble for these idiots. Hakim Bashi came back with his 3 fists long beard and instructed me to smoke opium. What a priceless drug it was for my painful existence. When I smoked opium, my thoughts would become grand, pure, magical, and soaring. I would traverse another realm, beyond the ordinary world. My thoughts and concerns would be freed from the bonds of gravity and weight of earthly things, and would soar towards the realm of tranquility and silence. It was as if they had placed me on the golden wings of a bat, and I was travelling in a radiant and vacuous world, free of obstacles. So profound and pleasurable was this effect that it was more pleasurable than dying. When I got up from the foot of the brazier, I went to the window facing our yard. I saw that my nanny was sitting in the sun, cleaning vegetables. I heard her tell her daughter-in-law, "Our hearts go out to him. I wish God would kill him and put him out of his misery." It seems Hakim Bashi had told them I was not going to get better, but I was not surprised. How foolish these people are! When she came an hour later and brought me Jushanda, her eyes had turned red and puffy from the strain of crying, but she stood opposite me and forced a smile. They were acting in front of me. Everyone was acting in front of me, and how amateurish at that! They thought to themselves that I did not know. But why was this woman showing affection towards me? Why did she consider herself a partner to my suffering? One day they had given her money, and she had shoved her wrinkly black nipples like tiny buckets into my mouth. I wish her breasts had been stricken with leprosy. Now that I see her breasts, I feel like vomiting at the thought that at the time I suckled her life juices with an insatiable appetite, and that the warmth of our bodies joined together. Her hands used to hold and touch me, handle my entire body, and it was because of this that even now she treated me with a particular brazenness that might be found in an unmarried woman. She still regarded me as a child because at one time she used to hold me over the latrine. Who knows, she may have even used me as her lesbian partner, like adopted sisters that women choose for themselves, and even now with what attention and curiosity she would turn me over, hold and clean me. If my wife, that whore, would have taken care of me, I would have never let Nana June touch me, for I thought to myself that my wife's scope of thought and sense of beauty surpassed Nanny's. Or maybe its sexual aspect had created this feeling of shame and modesty in me. In this way I felt less shameful in the presence of my nanny, and it was only she who looked after me. My nanny must have believed that fate was such that it was written in the stars. In addition, she was reaping the benefits of my illness. She would confide in me all the family affairs, revealing all the pastimes, fights and quarrels, as well as her simple, sly and beggarly soul. And with what spite she would relate to me that she had no stomach for her bride, as if she was a rival wife who had stolen all of her son's love and desire. Her bride must be pretty. I have seen her from the window facing the backyard. She has blue-green eyes, blonde hair, and a petite, straight nose. Sometimes my nanny would talk to me about the miracles of the prophets. In her own mind, this was a way in which she could give me sympathy, but her base and idiotic thoughts only created envy in me. Sometimes she would bring me gossip. For instance, several days ago she told me that her daughter, meaning that whore, in an astrologically timely way, was knitting a Kiamat shirt for the baby, for her baby. Then, as if she herself also knew, she consoled me. Sometimes she will go and bring me potions and pills from wherever she can find them. She goes to the sorcerer, fortune-teller, and the Jamzan, begins their divination and confers with them about my situation. The last Wednesday of the year she performed falgouche and brought back a bowl with onions, rice, and putrid oil. She said that she had begged these things for the sake of my health, and she stealthily force-fed me all these spoiling, filthy things. Also, at regular intervals she would force Hakim Bashi's Jushandas on me, those same unholy Jushandas that he had prescribed for me, hyssop, lilies of the valley, camphor, maidenhair, chamomile, goose oil of bay, linseed, fir tree seeds, starch, rocket seed, and other such nonsense. Several days ago she brought me a prayer book that had a layer of dust on it. Not only had I no use for a prayer book, but likewise no sort of rabble book, writing or idea had any use for me. What use had I for their lies and nonsense? Was not I, myself, the product of a long line of past generations, and were not their inherited experiences found in me? Was not the past in my being? But none of this has ever had any effect on me, neither mosque nor the call of the muezzin, nor ablutions and spitting, and bending over and standing upright before an almighty God with absolute power that one has to converse with in Arabic. Before, when I was healthy, if I several times obligatorily went to the mosque and tried to harmonize my heart with those of others, inevitably my eyes would wander and stare at the glazed tiles and the forms and patterns of the walls of the mosque, transporting me to the realm of pleasant dreams. And in this way I would find a means of escape for myself. During prayer I would close my eyes and hold my palms in front of my face. In this night that I had created for myself, like the words they unconsciously repeat while sleeping, I would pray, but the utterance of these words was not from deep within my heart, for I would much rather talk to a friend or an acquaintance than with God, with Almighty God, for God was too much for me. Whilst lying in a warm and damp bed, all of these issues were not worth more than a grain of barley to me, and at these times I did not want to know whether a God truly existed, or if it was an object the rulers on earth have conceived to consolidate their divine station and ravage their subjects, to reflect the images on earth onto the sky. I only wanted to know whether or not I would make it through the night until the next morning. Confronted with death, I sensed how weak and childish were religion, faith, and belief, almost a kind of diversion for healthy and fortunate persons. Confronted with the horrifying actuality of death and the suffering that I went through, all that they had inculcated in me about reward and punishment of the soul and the day of resurrection had become an insipid lie. And when confronted with the fear of death, the prayers that they had taught me had no effect. No, the fear of death would not loosen its grip on my collar. Those who have never experienced pain will not understand these words. So much had the sense of life grown in me that the slightest moment of pleasure made up for all the long hours of anxiety and suffocation. I saw that pain and suffering existed, but they were devoid of any purpose or meaning. Amongst the rabble I had become an unknown and unfamiliar breed, so much so that they had forgotten that before this I was a part of their world. What was frightening was that I felt I was neither completely alive nor completely dead. I was but a moving corpse that could neither join the world of the living nor partake in the oblivion and peace of death. At the beginning of the night, as I got up from the foot of the opium brazier, I looked out the window of my room. A black tree and the boarded-up front of the butcher's shop were visible. The dark shadows had become blended in each other. I felt that everything was fleeting and barren. The black and tar-covered sky was like a tattered black tent that had been riddled with holes by countless shining stars. At this time the call to prayer started. It was an ill-timed call to prayer. Perhaps a woman, maybe that whore was in labour, was busy delivering. The howling of a dog was heard amidst the call to prayer. I thought to myself, if it's true that each person has a star in the sky, then mine must be far, dark and meaningless. Maybe I never had a star. At this time the clamour of a band of drunken night watchmen rose from the valley. They were passing by and telling each other lewd jokes. Then they collectively started singing. "Come, let us go and drink wine, wine from the land of Ray. If not now, then when is the time?" Terrified, I pulled myself away. Their singing was echoing in the air in a peculiar way. Slowly their sounds became distant and smothered. No, they did not want me, they did not know. Once again the darkness and silence covered everything. I did not light my tallow burner. I enjoyed sitting in the darkness. Darkness, this vicious fluid that seeps into everywhere and everything. I had become used to it. It was in the darkness that my lost thoughts, forgotten fears, unbelievably terrifying thoughts that were hidden in the recesses of my brain that I did not know existed, all would gain new life, move about and mock me. These thoughts and amorphous, threatening forms were found in abundance in the corner of the room, the space behind the curtain, the spot next to the door. There, beside the curtain, a terrifying figure was seated. Unmoving, he was neither happy nor sad. Each time that I turned around, he stared into the depths of my eyes. His face was familiar to me, as if I had seen this very face in my childhood. It was on Sadegh. I was playing Sarmamak with some children by the bank of the Suren River. It had seemed to me that this same face appeared beside the ordinary faces of those who were short, funny, and harmless. His face was similar to this same butcher outside my window across the street. It seemed that this individual has been involved with my life, and I had seen him often, as if this shadow were my twin and situated in the narrow circle of my life. As soon as I got up to light the tallow burner, that figure spontaneously faded and disappeared. I went in front of the mirror and stared at my face. The image that formed before me seemed foreign. It was terrifying and beyond belief. My image had become stronger than I, and I had become like an image in the mirror. I thought that I could not be alone in the same room as my image. I was afraid that if I fled, he would follow me. We were like two cats that face one another for a fight, but I raised my hand and covered my eyes so I could create the eternal night in the palm of my hand. Oftentimes the state of fear created pleasure and a particular drunkenness, such that I would become dizzy and my knees would become weak, and I would have the urge to vomit. Suddenly I was aware that I was standing on my own 2 feet. This state of affairs seemed bizarre to me. It was impossible. How could I have been standing on my feet? I thought if I moved one of my legs, my balance would be lost. A kind of dizziness had overtaken me. The earth and its creatures had become infinitely distant from me. In a vague way, I wished for an earthquake or a heavenly thunderbolt so that I could be reborn in a peaceful and luminescent world. When I wanted to go to bed, several times I uttered to myself, "Death, death." My lips were shut, but I was terrified of my own voice. I had essentially lost all of my former courage. I had become like the flies that charge indoors at the beginning of autumn, weak and shriveled flies that fear the buzzing sounds of their own wings. For a time they are unmoving, crouching on a spot on the wall. As soon as they discover that they are alive, they insensibly throw themselves at the windows and walls, and their corpses fall all around the room. When my eyelids began to close, a hidden world would materialize before me, a world that I had created in its entirety, and which accommodated my ideas and perceptions. In any case, it was much more real and natural than my wakeful world, as if there were no hindrance or obstacle in front of my thoughts, as if time and place were losing their hold. This extinguished feeling of lust, the offspring of which was sleep, was the offspring of my ultimate necessities, conjuring up before me unbelievable yet natural figures and happenings. After I would awaken, in the same moment I was unaware of the time and place of my being. I still doubted my own existence. Maybe the dreams I had were all made up by myself, and I knew their truthful interpretations beforehand. Much of the night had passed before I fell asleep. Suddenly I saw that I was moving about freely and breathing with ease, in an unfamiliar city that had strange and peculiar geometrically shaped houses, prisms, cones, and cubes with dark and squat entrances, with morning glories winding up the walls and doors. But the people of this city had died a strange death. All were frozen stiff in their places. 2 drops of blood had come down from their mouths onto their clothes. The head of whomever I touched would detach and fall. I reached the front of a butcher's shop. I saw a man who looked similar to the old peddler in front of our house, wearing a shawl and carrying a jackknife, and he was staring at me with his red eyes. It was as if his eyelids had been cut off. I wanted to take the jackknife from his hand. His head detached and fell to the ground. I started to run because of my intense fear. I was running in the alleys. Whomever I saw was frozen in place. I was afraid to look behind me. When I reached my father-in-law's house, my brother-in-law, the little brother of that whore, was sitting on the bench. I reached in my pockets and brought out 2 coluches to give to him, but as soon as I touched him, his head detached and fell to the floor. I screamed and woke up. It was still twilight. My heart was suffocating. It seemed that the ceiling was weighing down on my head. The walls had grown inordinately thick, and my chest was about to burst open. My eyesight had become blurry. For a time I stared at the beams in a state of fright. I would count them and then start counting all over again. Just as I forced my eyes shut, the sound of the door came. Nana June had come to sweep my room. She had placed my breakfast in the upper chamber. I went to the upper chamber and sat in front of the sash. From up there, the old peddler who sat in front of my room could not be seen. Only from the left side did I see the butcher, but his actions, which from the window of my room seemed frightening, heavy, and deliberate, appeared absurd and desperate from up there, as if this man's profession must not have been butchery, and he was play-acting. They brought the black, skinny pack-horses that coughed deeply and dryly, and that had the carcasses of sheep hanging on both sides. The butcher stroked his moustache with his greasy hand and inspected the sheep with a buyer's eye, and laboriously took 2 of them and hung them up on the hooks of his shop. He would stroke the thighs of the sheep. Perhaps also at night, when he would caress his wife's body, he would remember the sheep and think about how much money he would earn if he killed his wife. When the sweeping was finished, I returned to my room and made a decision, a horrific decision. I went to the closet of my room and took out the bone-handled jackknife from the box. I cleaned the blade with the end of my tunic and placed it under my pillow. I had come to this decision a long time ago, but I do not know what it was in the movements of the butcher when he would cut up the thighs of the sheep, weigh them, and then give an admiring look, that I unconsciously felt that I had to emulate him, that I needed to feel this pleasure. From the window of my room between the clouds, a completely deep and blue hole was visible in the sky. I thought that in order to reach there I had to climb a very tall ladder. The horizon was covered by thick, yellow, deathly clouds, such that they were weighing down over the entire city. It was terrifying and exhilarating weather. I do not know why I was not bending over toward the ground. I always thought of death in this kind of weather. But now that death had me by the throat with its bony hands and bloody face, only now did I decide. But I had decided to take this whore with me, so that afterwards she would not say of me, "God bless him, his suffering is over." At this moment, in front of my window, they were carrying a coffin draped in black, and on which they lit a candle. The cries of "La ilaha illallah" made me take notice. All of the tradesmen and passers-by stopped what they were doing and followed the coffin for 7 steps. Even the butcher came out and took 7 steps after the coffin for Savab before returning to his store. But the old peddler did not budge from his sophra. What serious looks were on the faces of all the people. Maybe they remembered the concept of death and the other world. When my nanny brought me Jushanda, I saw that she was crestfallen. She was passing the prayer beads through her fingers and reciting to herself. Then she came and prayed behind the door of my room, loudly reciting Allahum il Allahum, as if I were the functionary in charge of absolving the living. But all of this buffoonery had no effect on me, quite the opposite. I took pleasure in the fact that even if temporary and false, yet for at least a few seconds the rabble traversed through my world. Was not my room a coffin? Was not my bedding colder and darker than a grave? The bedding that was always laid out and inviting me to sleep. Several times this thought came to me that I was in a coffin. At night it seemed my room would shrink and press on me. Do they not feel the same thing in the grave? Does anyone know what is felt after death? Although the blood turns still in the body and some parts begin to decompose after the passage of a night and a day, the hair on the head and the nails grow until some time after death. Are senses and thoughts extinguished after the heart stops beating, or do they for a time continue to lead a mysterious existence using the remainder of the blood found in the lesser blood vessels? The realization of death is in itself frightening. Imagine the feeling of one who thinks he is already dead. There are old persons who die with a smile on their lips, as if they are going from one sleep to another, like a tallow burner that burns out. But a strong youth who suddenly dies and whose entire strength battles against death for a time, what feelings will he experience? Many times I would think about death and the decomposition of the pieces of my body, so much so that this thought did not frighten me. Quite the opposite. I truly wished to die and become non-existent. The only thing I feared was that the particles of my body would mix with the particles of the bodies of the rabble. This thought was unbearable to me. Sometimes I wished that after dying I would have long hands with long, sensitive fingers, so that I could gather all the bits of my body together and hold them in my hands, so that the pieces of my body which belonged to me would not flow into the bodies of the rabble. At times I thought that which I was seeing was also seen by those about to die. The anxiety, trepidation, dread, and pleasure of living had abandoned me. By casting aside beliefs that had been forced upon me, I felt a particular sense of inner peace. The only thing that comforted me was the hope of nothingness after death. The thought of a second life made me frightened and weary. I still had not grown fond of the world I was living in. Of what use to me was another world? I felt that this world was not for me. It was for a bunch of shameless, insolent, beggarly, pedantic muleteers and cold-hearted, discontented people. For those who were created suitably for this world, and who begged and flattered the brutes of heaven and earth, like a hungry dog wagging its tail for a piece of offal in front of the butcher's shop. The thought of a second life made me frightened and weary. No, I had no use for all these nauseating worlds and all these repulsive faces. Was God so parvenu that he had to display all his worlds to me? But I cannot write falsehoods, and in the event that one must travel through a new life, I wish that I would breathe without difficulty, that I would have deadened and dull thoughts and feelings, and without feeling weary, I would be able to live my life under the shade of the columns of a lingam temple, roam in such a way that the sun would not glare in my eyes, that the sounds of life and the conversations of people would not be grating to my ears. The more I sank into myself, like an animal that seeks refuge in a burrow during winter-time, the more I heard the voices of others with my ears, and the more I heard the voice in my throat. The loneliness and isolation that had hidden behind me were like eternal nights, thick and compressed. Nights that have a vicious, dense, and contagious darkness, and that wait before descending upon the deserted cities that are full of dreams, lustful and spiteful. But besides being a certain insane and abstract proof for this voice that I considered my own, I was nothing. During the act of procreation, the force that bonds two people together escaping solitude is in essence a trait that exists in each person, a madness which is imbued with a grief that slowly draws towards the depths of death. Only death does not lie. The presence of death destroys and annihilates all superstitions. We are the children of death, and it is death that rescues us from the falsehoods of life. And at the end of life, it is he that calls us and summons us closer to himself. During the tender age, when we still do not understand human speech, if we pause for a moment while at play, it is to hear the sound of death. And throughout life it is death that is pointing at us. Has such an occurrence not happened for everyone, whereby suddenly and without reason they go into thought, and so immersed are they in thought that they become unaware of their surroundings and time, and forget what it was they were thinking of? Then one has to struggle to once more become aware of and familiar with their surroundings and the visible world. This is the sound of death. In this damp bed that had come to smell like sweat, when my eyelids became heavy and I wanted to surrender myself to nothingness and the eternal night, all of my lost memories and forgotten fears again came to life. The fear that the pillow feathers would become dagger blades, that the button on my cloak would expand to the size of a millstone, the fear that the piece of lavash falling to the floor would shatter like glass, the worry that if I should fall asleep, the oil of the tallow burner would spill on the ground and raise the city. The obsession that the paws of the dog in front of the butcher's would begin to sound like horses' hooves. The anxiety that the old peddler would begin to laugh as he sat in front of his wares. So hard would he laugh that he could not control himself. The fear that the worm in the footbath of our house would turn into an Indian snake. The fear that my hands would become leaden, the fear that my bedding would turn into a hinged tombstone, and by sliding on itself it would lock its marble teeth and entomb me. The anxiety that my voice would leave me, and no matter how much I would shout, no one would come to my aid. I used to wish that I could bring back the memories of my childhood, but when they came and I experienced them, they were as painful and difficult as they were at the time. The following things were not without fear and anxiety: the continuous threat of death, which incurably tramples all thoughts and forges ahead, coughs that sounded like the coughs of the skinny black pack horses in front of the butcher's shop, being forced to bring up the mucus, and the fear lest a spot of blood he found in it. Blood, this flowing, tepid, salty liquid that emerges from the depths of the body. The elixir of life that must be forcibly disgorged. Life, with coolness and indifference, would reveal to each person their mask. Perhaps each person carries several masks. Some only continuously use one of these masks, and naturally it will become dirty, gathering wrinkles and folds. This group is frugal. The other group saves their masks for their offspring, and others continuously change their faces, but as soon as they grow old, they realize that they are using their last face, and that it will soon become worn out, after which their real face will emerge from behind the mask. I do not know what toxic effects the wall of my room had on my thoughts, so as to poison them. I was certain that before me someone who was a murderer, a chained lunatic, was in this room. Not only the walls in my room, but also the view outside, the butcher, the old peddler, my nanny, that whore, and all the people that I saw, and also the bowl in which I ate my barley ash, and the clothes that I wore. All of these things had come together to create these thoughts in me. Several nights ago, just as I was taking my clothes off in the alcove of the bathhouse, my thoughts changed. When the bath attendant was pouring water over my head, it was as if my dark thoughts were being washed away. In the bathhouse I saw my shadow on the dripping wet wall. I saw that I was as skinny and fragile as I had been 10 years ago when a child. I precisely remember that my shadow would fall on the dripping wet wall in this same manner. I inspected my body. My thigh, calf, and loins looked somehow hopelessly lustful. Their shadows too were like 10 years prior, like when I was a child. I felt that my life, like a shadow that wanders aimlessly, like the shadows that tremble on the bathhouse wall, had entirely passed by without meaning or purpose. But others were strong, sturdy and thick-necked. Certainly their shadows cast larger and more colourfully on the dripping wet bathhouse wall, and they left their impressions for a time, while mine quickly became erased. When I dressed again in the alcove, my appearance, movement, and thoughts changed once more, as if I had entered into a new world, as if I had been reborn into the very world I despised. In any case, I had once again regained life, for it was a miracle that I had not melted away in the waters of the bathhouse like a lump of salt. My life seemed just as unnatural, unknown, and unbelievable as the image on the pencase that I am busy painting. Perhaps a mad and obsessive painter painted on this cover. Oftentimes when I look at this image, it appears familiar to me. Maybe it is for this image. Maybe this same image compels me to write. Painted is a hunched-over old man that looks like a Hindu yogi, wrapped in a cloak with a turban around his head, squatting underneath a cypress tree, who, with an astonished look, places the index finger of his left hand to his lips. A damsel in a long black dress, perhaps a Bogham Darcy, is dancing with unworldly movements in front of him. She is holding a morning glory flower in her hands, and between them there is the distance of a stream. By the foot of the opium brazier, I dispersed all my grim thoughts among the magnificent and heavenly smoke. During this time my body was thinking, my body was dreaming, gliding, as if freed from the pollution and gravity of air. It was flying in an unknown world that was full of unknown colours and images. Opium had breathed into my frame a plant soul, a sluggish plant soul. I was travelling in a plant world. I had turned into a plant. But just as I was dozing in front of the leather sofa and brazier, with a cloak over my shoulders, I do not know why, I began thinking of the old peddler. He, too, was hunched over his things in the same way and sat in the same manner that I did. This thought created a fright in me. I stood up and threw aside the cloak. I went in front of the mirror. My cheeks were set ablaze, the colour of the meat in front of the butcher's shop. My beard was dishevelled, but I had acquired an attractive, holy look. My sickly eyes had a tired, offended, and childish expression, as if all my cumbersome, worldly, and mortal parts had melted away. I liked the way my face looked. I took a kind of lustful pleasure in myself. I told myself in front of the mirror, "Your pain is so deep that it is stuck in the depths of your eyes, and if you cry, either the tears will come from your eyes, or they won't come out at all." Then, once more I said, "You're a fool! Why don't you just get rid of yourself? What can you be waiting for? You still have such expectations? Isn't the flask of wine in your closet? Take a sip and go, because you're gone. Fool! You're a fool! I'm talking with air!" The thoughts that came to me were not related to each other. I heard the sound of my own voice in my throat, but I did not understand the meaning of the words. In my head these sounds were mixed with other sounds, like the time I had a fever. My fingers seemed larger than usual. My eyes were drooping. My lips had become thickened. As soon as I turned around, I saw that my nanny was standing in the doorway. I laughed uncontrollably. My nanny was motionless. Her dull eyes were staring at me, but they were without amazement or anger or sadness. Generally speaking, a foolish act will make one laugh, but my laughter was much deeper than that. This great absurdity was related to all those other things in the world that have not been discovered, and the understanding of which is difficult. That which is lost in the depths of the night's darkness, the one act that is beyond man, is death. My nanny picked up the brazier and left with measured steps. I wiped the sweat off my forehead. White spots had appeared on my palms. I leaned on the wall. I pressed my head against the pillar. It seemed I was feeling better. Then I do not know where I had heard this song that I sang to myself. Come, let us go and drink wine, wine from the land of Ray. If not now, then when is the time? Always before the coming of a crisis, my heart was affected first, creating in me a particular kind of anxiety. It was a sorrowful anxiety and state of being, like frustrations warming over my heart. It was a sorrowful anxiety and state of being, like frustrations swarming over my heart, like the weather before a storm. It was then that the real world receded from me, and I lived in a luminous world that had an unfathomable distance from the real world. At these times I feared myself. I feared everyone, as if this state was due to an illness. It was because of this that my mind had become feeble. When I saw the old peddler and the butcher from the window of my room, I also became frightened. I do not know what there was in their appearance or actions that was frightening. My nanny told me a frightful thing. She swore to the prophets and holy sages that she had seen the old peddler come to my wife's room at night, and from behind the door had heard that whore say to him, "Unwrap your scarf." It is unbelievable. It was the day before yesterday, or the day before that, when I had screamed and my wife had come to the doorway. I saw for myself. I saw with my own eyes that the impression of the old man's dirty, rotting, yellow teeth, from which Arabic verses passed through, were on my wife's cheek. As a matter of fact, why did this man show up in front of my house ever since I was married? Was he destitute because of love? Had he become hopelessly in love with this whore? I remember that same day I went in front of his wares and asked the old man the price of his jug. From underneath his shawl his two rotten teeth emerged between his hare lip, and then he gave a dry, grating laugh that made the hairs on one's body stand on end, and said, "Are you buying without even seeing it? This jug's not worth anything. Take it, young man. May it bring you good luck." In a peculiar way he said, "It's not worth anything. May it bring you good luck." I put my hands in my pockets. I placed 2 dirhams and 4 pashas on the edge of his sofa, and again he laughed. He gave a grating laugh that made the hair on one's body stand on end. I wanted to sink into the ground from the weight of shame. I covered my face with my hands and returned. The rusty smell of filthy, discarded things that have been rejected by life emanated from all his wares. Maybe he wanted to flaunt or show himself the discarded things of life. Was he not old and cast aside himself? The things that were laid out were all dirty, broken and dead, but what stubborn lives and meaningful forms they had. These dead objects were able to indelibly make their impressions on me in a manner that no living person could. But Nana June had brought me the news. She had told everyone with a filthy beggar. My nanny said lice had infested my wife's bedding, and she had gone to the bathhouse. How did her shadow fall on the dripping wet wall of the bathhouse? Perhaps a lustful shadow that was self-confident. But all in all, this time I did not disapprove of my wife's taste, for the old peddler was not a common, flat and insipid person, like all those useless men who attract voluptuous and vacant women. These pains, these incrustations of misfortune that were patched together on the old man's face and body, and the misery that was dripping off of him. Maybe he himself was unaware, but it gave him the appearance of a minor deity. And with the filthy sophra that was in front of him, he was the representative and manifestation of creation. Yes, I had seen the impression of 2 rotten yellow teeth through which Arabic verses pass. The impression of his teeth on my wife's face, this same wife who did not give herself to me, who humiliated me, but whom I loved despite all of this, even though until now she had not once let me kiss her on the lips. It was a yellow sun. The burning sound of the kettle drum rose up, a clamouring and wailing sound that awakened the fear of darkness and all inherited superstitions. The moment of crisis, the moment that I had been waiting for, arrived. A burning heat covered me from head to toe. I was suffocating. I collapsed on my bed and closed my eyes. The intensity of the fever was such that it seemed that everything had become enlarged and had acquired borders. The ceiling, instead of coming down, had ascended. My clothes were pressing against my body. I aimlessly got up, sat on my bed. I was murmuring to myself, "Any more would be impossible. It's unbearable." Suddenly I became quiet. Then in a measured way and out loud, I mockingly told myself, "Any more?" Then I added, "I'm a fool." I was not aware of the meaning of the words I was uttering. I only enjoyed the vibration of my voice in the air. Maybe I was talking to my shadow to dispel the loneliness. At this moment I saw an unbelievable thing. The door opened and that whore came in. It was apparent that she thought of me once in a while. There is still a reason to be grateful. She also knew that I was still alive and suffering, and that I would die slowly. There was still a reason to be grateful. I only wanted to know if she knew that it was for her I was dying. If she knew, then I could die in peace and happiness. Then I would be the luckiest person on earth. When this whore entered the room, all my dark thoughts fled. I do not know what rays were emanating from her body, from her movements, that soothed me. This time she was feeling better. She looked plump and mature. She wore an arcologue with dark grey sambusas. She had plucked her eyebrows, painted on a mole. She had coloured her eyebrows. She had applied rouge, white powder and eyeliner. In short, she had entered my room completely dressed up. It was as if she were completely content with her life, and she unconsciously placed the index finger of her left hand in her mouth. Was this the same fair woman, the same delicate, ethereal girl who used to wear a wrinkled black dress and who used to play Samamak with me by the banks of the Suren River? The same girl who had a fleeting and childlike aura of freedom and whose lust-inspiring ankles could be seen underneath her skirt? Until now, when I looked at her, I had not fully comprehended. But now it was as if a veil had been lifted before my eyes. I do not know why I was reminded of the sheep in front of the butcher's shop. She had become but a piece of boneless meat and had completely lost that alluring quality of the past. She had become a solid, mature and rosy-coloured woman who was preoccupied with life. A genuine woman. My wife. Frightened and terrified, I saw that my wife had grown up and become mature while I remained in the state of childhood. To be truthful, I felt embarrassed before her eyes. Her face, a wife who gave her body to everyone but me, and I merely consoled myself with the fanciful memory of her childhood, a time where she had a plain childlike face, when she had an evanescent and fleeting state of being, and when the impression of the old peddler's teeth had yet to be seen on her face. No, this was not the same person. With derision she asked, "How are you doing?" I answered, "Aren't you free? Don't you do whatever you like? What's my health to you?" She slammed the door and left. She did not even turn to look at me. It seems I had forgotten the manner of speaking with the people of the world, with living people. She, the same woman who I thought was devoid of any kind of feeling, was offended by this act of mine. Several times I wanted to get up and throw myself at her feet, to cry, to ask for forgiveness. Yes, cry, for I thought if I could cry, I would find relief. Several minutes, several hours, or several centuries passed. I do not know. I had become like the insane and took pleasure in my pain, a pleasure that was beyond human, a pleasure that only I could feel, and even the gods, if they existed, could not experience this amount of pleasure. It was then that I discovered my superiority. I felt my superiority over the rabble, nature, the gods that are born of man's lust. I had become a god. I was even greater than a god, for I felt an eternal and holy current within me. But she returned. She was not as cold-hearted as I had imagined. I got up and kissed her skirt. In a fit of tears and coughing, I threw myself at her feet. I was rubbing my face against her calf, and several times I called her by her real name. It seemed her real name had a particular sound and resonance, but in my heart, in the depths of my heart, I was saying, whore, whore. I embraced her calf muscles, which tasted like the end of a cucumber, mildly bitter and acrid. I cried so much. I do not know how much time passed. As soon as I came to, I saw that she was gone. Maybe it did not even take a moment for me to internally feel all the pleasure, kindness, and suffering of man. And I remained frozen in front of the smoking tallow burner, like the times I would sit in front of the opium brazier, like the old peddler who sat in front of his things. I did not move from my place. I was just staring at the soot of the tallow burner. The soot was falling on my hands and face like black snowflakes. When my nanny brought me a bowl of barley ash and chicken rice, she screamed out of fright, stepped back and dropped the supper tray. I was pleased that at least I had caused her a fright. Then I got up, placed the snuffer over the wick, and went in front of the mirror. I was rubbing the ashes on my face. What a terrifying appearance! With my fingers I would pull back my lower eyelids and let them go. I was baring my teeth, blowing air in my cheeks, lifting my beard and twisting it by both ends. I was making faces. What a talent my face had for making ridiculous and scary expressions. Perhaps all the ridiculous, scary, and unbelievable looks, the faces that were hidden in my being, were all overtly seen in this manner. I was aware of and sensed this state within myself, and at the same time it seemed absurd to me. All of these faces were inside of and belonged to me. Scary, funny, and criminal masks that could change with a snap of the finger. The form of the old man who read the Koran, the form of the butcher, the form of my wife. I had seen all of these in myself, as though their reflection was inside of me. All of these faces were within me, yet none belonged to me. Was not the composition and appearance of my face created as a result of unknown workings, as a consequence of inherited obsessions, fornications, and disappointments? And I, who was the guardian of this inherited burden, was not my mind, by means of an unconscious, maddening, and ludicrous sense, aware enough to preserve this expression in my face. Perhaps only in death would my face be freed from the shackles of this obsession and assume the natural state it was meant to have. But in its final state, would not the expressions that my ridiculous desires were constantly carving on my face only leave their impressions deeper and harder? In any case, I understood what I was capable of. I discovered my abilities. I suddenly started to laugh. What a grating, repulsive, and frightful laugh it was. So much so that the hairs on my body stood on end, for I did not recognize my own voice. It was a foreign sound, like a laugh that often echoed from the bottom of my throat. I heard it in the depths of my ears. It sounded in my ears. At the same time I started on a coughing fit, and a bit of bloody mucus, a piece of my lung, fell on the mirror. I dragged it across the mirror with the tip of my finger. Just as I turned, I saw that Nana June was staring at me, pale as the moon, with dishevelled hair and dim, frightened eyes, a bowl of barley ash in hand, from the same ash that she had brought before. I covered my face with my hands and hid myself behind the curtain of the closet. When I wanted to go to sleep, a ring of fire was pressing around my head. The sharp, sensuous smell of sandalwood oil that I had poured in the tallow burner swirled around my nose. It smelled like my wife's calves, and the taste of the end of a cucumber, with a mild bitterness, was in my mouth. I was rubbing my hands over my body and thinking of the various parts of my body, thigh, calf, biceps, and all of these I compared to my wife's, the line of the thigh and buttocks, the warmth of my wife's body. All of these things again appeared before me. It was something greater than imagining, for it had the component of need. I felt that I wanted her body near me. One movement, one decision was all that was needed to dispel this lustful obsession, but to such a degree was this fiery ring tightening and burning around my head that I had completely plunged into a murky sea, in the midst of frightening figures. It was still dark. I was awakened by the sound of a band of drunken night watchmen who were passing through the alley. They were cursing amongst themselves and collectively singing, "Come, let us go and drink wine, wine from the land of Ray. If not now, then when is the time?" I remembered. No, suddenly there was a revelation that I had a flask of wine on the top shelf of my room, wine that had the venom of the Naja snake dissolved in it, and with one sip from it all of life's nightmares would become obliterated and annihilated. But that whore, this word made me more desirous of her. It made her seem more vivacious and fiery to me. Could I imagine anything better than giving her a cup of wine and drinking a cupful myself, and then dying together in a fit of convulsions? What is love? For the rabble it is a temporary indiscretion, a debauchery. The rabble love must be found in the lewd songs and in the obscenities and profane phrases that they repeat in drunken and sober states, such as shoving the donkey's hooves in the sludge, pouring the dirt over my head. But my love for her was something else altogether. It is true, I knew her from before. Her strange slanted eyes, narrow half-open mouth, quiet and soothing voice, all of these were full of old and painful memories for me, and I was searching in all of these things for that which I had been deprived of, that which was related to me, and that which they had taken from me. Had they dispossessed me forever? It was because of this that an even more frightful sensation had awoken in me. I felt another kind of pleasure that would compensate for my doomed love. It had become an obsession for me. I do not know why I thought of the butcher in front of the window of my room who would roll up his sleeves, say his bismillah, and cut up the meat. His expression and manner of being were always in front of me. In the end I had also decided, a horrific decision. I got up from my bed, rolled up my sleeves, and picked up the bone-handled jackknife that I had placed under my pillow. I bent over and put a yellow cloak over my shoulders. Then I wrapped my face and head with a scarf. I felt that a state of mind had appeared in me that was a mixture of the butcher and the old peddler. Then, tiptoeing, I went toward my wife's room. Her room was dark. I slowly opened the door. It was as if she was dreaming. She was loudly saying to herself, "Take off your scarf." I went next to the bed. I moved my head in front of her warm and gentle breath. What a refreshing and rejuvenating warmth she had. It occurred to me that if I breathed in this warmth for a period of time, I would be reborn. Oh, how many times had I thought that everyone's breath must be hot and burning like mine. I paid attention to see whether there was also another man, meaning if any of her paramours were there or not, but she was alone. I understood that whatever they attributed to her was utter libel and false accusations. How did we know she was not still a virgin? I became ashamed of all of my fanciful ideas concerning her. I was ashamed of myself. This feeling did not last more than a minute, for at the same time the sound of a sneeze came from behind the door, and I heard a muted, ridiculous laugh that made the hair on one's body stand on end. This sound dragged out all the veins from my body. If I had not heard this sneeze and laugh, if Sabr had not come, just as I had planned, I would have done the following: cut up all of her body in pieces and given it to the butcher in front of our house to sell to people. I would have taken a piece of her thigh meat and given it to the old Quran reader as an oblation, and the next day I would have gone to him and said, "Do you know whose meat you ate yesterday?" If he had not laughed, I would have had to have done this at night, so that my eyes would not meet the eyes of the whore, for I was embarrassed before the expression of her eyes. They reproached me. In the end, I took a bit of cloth from the edge of her bedding that by my foot, and ran away with apprehension. I tossed the jackknife on the roof, for all of my criminal thoughts were created by this jackknife. I distanced myself from this jackknife, which resembled the butcher's knife. When I returned to my room and went in front of the tallow burner, I noticed that I had taken her dress, the dirty dress that covered the flesh of her body, the soft, silken dress that was the handiwork of India and that gave off the smell of her body, the scent of champak perfume, and in which the warmth of her body, her existence, still remained. I smelled it, placed it between my legs, and slept. On no other night had I slept as soundly. In the early morning I was awakened by the screaming and yelling of my wife, who was clamouring because of her lost dress and who kept repeating, "A brand new dress," whereas the sleeves were already torn. But even if blood had been split and flowing, I was not willing to give up the dress. Did I not have the right to a tattered dress of my wife's? When Nana June brought me the she-donkey's milk, honey and taftoon bread, she had also placed a bone-handled jackknife next to my breakfast on the tray, and said that she had seen it among the old peddler's things and had bought it. Then she raised her eyebrows and said, "It may come in handy sometime." I picked up the jackknife and looked at it. It was mine. Then Nana June, in a complaining and irritated manner, said, "Yes, at the crack of dawn my daughter, meaning that whore, says that you stole my dress last night. Now I don't want to be the one responsible for you two, but yesterday your wife saw a spot of blood. We know that the child, she said she got pregnant in the bath. At night I had gone to rub and massage her back, and I saw bruises on her biceps. She showed them to me and said I went into the basement at the wrong time, and Asma Betaroon pinched me. She continued, "Did you even know that your wife was pregnant?" I laughed and said, "Maybe the baby looks like the old Quran reader. Perhaps the baby jumped upon seeing his face." Then Nana June walked out the door with indignation, as if she were not expecting such a response. I immediately got up and with trembling hands took the bone-handled jackknife to the closet, placed it inside the box, and shut its lid. No, there was no way that the baby jumped upon seeing my face. The baby must have jumped to the old peddler's face. In the afternoon the door to my room opened. Her brother, the brother of this same whore, entered the room while chewing on his finger. Anyone who saw them would immediately know they were brother and sister. Such a similarity! He had a small, tight mouth, full-bodied lips that were wet and sensuous, intoxicating curved eyelids, bewildered slanted eyes, prominent cheeks, unkempt date-coloured hair, and a wheat-coloured complexion. He looked just like that whore, and had a piece of her devilish soul. one of these stoic, soulless Turkoman faces that was appropriately created for the fight against the world, a face that justified any action for the continuation of life, as if nature had predicted this beforehand, as if their ancestors had lived underneath the sun and rain for a long time and had fought nature, and not only had they given them, with some changes, their appearance and character, but they had bequeathed their perseverance, their avarice and hunger and lust onto them. The taste of his mouth I knew to be a mild, bitter taste like the end of a cucumber. Then he entered my room. He looked at me with his bewildered Turkoman eyes and said, "Shahjun says that Hakim Bashi said that you will die, that we will finally be rid of you. Say, how does a person die anyway?" I said, "Tell her I've been dead for a long time." Shahjun said if the baby wasn't stillborn, the entire house would be ours. I involuntarily burst out laughing in such a way that I did not recognize my own voice. It was a dry, grating laugh that made the hairs on one's body stand on end. The child ran out of the room in a state of fright. At this point I understood why the butcher, out of sheer pleasure, would rub clean the bone-handled jackknife on the sheep's thigh. The pleasure of cutting a boneless piece of meat from within which dead blood, clotted blood, pools like sludge, and the rasping sounds of the sheep, the falling to the ground of drop after drop of watery blood, the yellow dog in front of the butcher's shop, and the cut-off head of the cow that had fallen on the floor of the stall and looks candidly with its dark eyes, and also the heads of all the sheep on whose eyes the dust of death has settled. They had also seen. They also knew. Now I understand that I had become a demigod. I was beyond all the base and trivial needs of people. I felt the eternal and perpetual current within me. What is eternity? For me, eternity consisted of playing Sarmamak with that whore by the banks of the Suren River, and only for a moment closing my eyes and hiding my face in her dress. One time it occurred to me that I was talking to myself, and in a strange way. I wanted to talk to myself, but my lips had become so heavy that they were not willing to make the slightest movement. However, without my lips even moving or hearing my own voice, I felt that I was talking to myself. In this room that, like a grave, was getting darker and smaller by the moment, the night had encircled me with its terrifying shadows. In front of the smoking tallow burner, with my fur jacket and cloak that I had wrapped around me, and with the scarf that I wore, my motionless shadow was cast on the wall. My shadow was cast on the wall with much more intensity and accuracy than my real body. My shadow had become more real than my being. Perhaps the old peddler, the butcher, Nana June, and that whore of a wife were all shadows of mine, shadows in the midst of which I was imprisoned. At this time I had become akin to an owl, but my wailings had become stuck in my throat, and I spat them out in the form of blood clots. Perhaps owls also have a disease whereby they think like me. My shadow on the wall had become just like an owl and bent over. He carefully read my writings. Surely he understood well. Only he could understand. When I looked at my shadow from the corner of my eye, I would become scared. It was a dark and quiet night, like the night that has covered my entire life, with terrifying forms that made faces at me from behind the curtained doors and walls. Sometimes my room would become so small it was as if I were lying in a coffin. My temples were burning. My limbs refused to make the slightest movement. A weight was pressing against my chest, like the carcasses that they throw onto the skinny black pack horses and deliver to the butchers. Death was softly humming its song, like a mute that is forced to repeat each word, and as soon as he finishes the verse, he starts from the beginning once more. His singing penetrated my flesh, like the vibrating wail of a saw. He would shout and suddenly become quiet. My eyes still had not closed when a band of drunken night watchmen passed behind my room. They were cursing amongst themselves and collectively singing, "Come, let us go and drink wine, wine from the land of Ray. If not now, then when is the time?" I told myself, even though in the end I will be caught by the sheriff. Suddenly I felt a superhuman power in myself. My forehead became cool. I got up. I took the yellow cloak I had and placed it on my shoulders. I wrapped the scarf several times around my head. I bent over. I went and took out the bone-handled jackknife that I had hidden in the box and tiptoed in the direction of the whore's room. When I reached her door, I saw that her room was drowning in a thick darkness. I listened carefully, and I heard her voice say, "You came? Take off your scarf." Her voice had a refreshing sound to it. It had become like her childhood voice, like the unconscious murmuring that one does during sleep. I had previously heard this sound in a deep sleep. Was she dreaming? Her voice had become quiet and deep, like the voice of a girl who used to play Sarmamak with me by the banks of the Seren River. I stopped for a moment. I again heard her say, "Come in, take off your scarf." In the darkness, I quietly entered the room. I took off my cloak and scarf. I undressed, but I do not know why I went to her bed while holding the bone-handled jackknife in my hand. The heat of her bed was such that it seemed to breathe new life into my corpse. Then, in memory of that same pale, skinny girl who had large, innocent Turkoman eyes, and with whom I played Sarmamak by the banks of the Seren River, I embraced her rejuvenating, moist and warm body. No, I attacked her like a hungry, rapacious beast, and in the depths of my heart I was repulsed by her. It seemed that the feeling of love and spite were conjoined. My wife's body, her moonlit and cool body like a naja snake that encircles its prey, opened up and ensnared me. The scent of her breasts was intoxicating. The flesh of her arm that was wrapped around my neck had a delicate warmth. At this moment I wished that my life would end, for in this moment all the spite and animosity I had towards her disappeared, and I tried to hold back my tears. Without my realizing it, like a mandrake, she locked her legs behind my legs, and her hands clasped the back of my neck. I felt the rejuvenating warmth of this flesh that was so young and fresh. All the particles of my burning body were drinking this warmth. I felt that she was luring me inside her like a prey. The feelings of fright and pleasure had become conjoined. Her mouth tasted like the end of a cucumber and was bitter. In the midst of this reviving force, I was sweating and in a state of rapture. For it was my body, it was all the particles of my being that had control over me, that was loudly singing its triumph and victory. In this endless sea, at the mercy of the whimsical waves, hopeless and condemned, I surrendered. Her hair, which smelled like champak perfume, was stuck to my face, and a joyous and impassioned cry came from the depths of our beings. Suddenly I felt her forcefully bite my lip in such a way it split down the middle. Did she chew on her own finger like this, or did she find out I was not the old man with the hare lip? I wanted to save myself, but I was incapable of the least amount of movement. All my efforts were in vain. The flesh of our bodies were welded together. I thought that she had gone mad. In the midst of the struggle, I unconsciously moved my hand, and I felt the jackknife that was in my hand penetrate some part of her body. A warm liquid spurted on my face. She screamed and then released me. I held on to the warm liquid that had pooled in my fist. I tossed the jackknife aside. I rubbed my free hand over her body. She had become completely cold. She had died. In the midst of this I fell to coughing, but this was not a cough. It was the sound of a dry, grating laugh that made the hairs on one's body stand on end. Horror-stricken, I threw the cloak over my shoulders and went to my room. In front of the tallow burner I opened my fist. I saw that her eyes were in my hands, and that my entire body was drowning in blood. I went in front of the mirror, but I covered my face with my hands because of the intensity of the fear. I saw that I looked like, no, as a matter of fact, I had become the old peddler. The hair of my beard and head was like the hair of a person who walks out alive from a room that has a naja snake in it. All of it had turned white. My lip was split open like the old man's. My eyes were without eyelashes. A bunch of white hair was sticking out from my chest, and a new spirit had taken possession of my body. I was essentially thinking differently, feeling differently, and I could not free myself from it, from the demon that had awakened in me. As I held my hands in front of my face, I involuntarily started laughing, a laugh much harder than the first one that shook my soul. A deep laugh, such that it was uncertain from which forgotten crevice of my body it came out of. An empty laugh that just echoed in my throat and came out of the emptiness. I had become the old peddler. The intensity of the apprehension was such that it seemed I had awoken from a long and deep sleep. I rubbed my eyes. I was in that same old room of mine. It was twilight, and the mist and fog had covered the windows. The rooster's cry was heard from afar. In the brazier in front of me, the flowers of fire had turned into cold ashes that could be blown away with a single breath. I felt that my thoughts had turned into ashes and nothingness, like the flowers of the fire, and that they could be blown over with a single breath. The first thing that I looked for was the raga flower vase that I had gotten from the old carriage driver in the graveyard. But the vase was not in front of me. I looked and saw a person with a bent shadow. No, this person was a humpbacked old man who had covered his face and head with a scarf, and had something resembling a vase wrapped up in a grimy handkerchief under his arm. He gave a dry and grating laugh that made the hairs on one's body stand on end. Just as I wanted to stand up, he exited the door of my room. I stood up. I wanted to run after him and get that vase, that wrapped handkerchief from him, but the old man had distanced himself with a particular nimbleness. I returned and opened the window facing the alley. In the alley I saw the hunched figure of the old man, whose shoulders were shaking from the force of laughter, and who was carrying the wrapped handkerchief under his arm. Rising and falling he went until he disappeared into the fog. I returned and looked at myself and saw that my clothes were torn. I was soiled from head to toe with clotted blood. 2 greenbottle flies were flying around me, and small white worms were squirming on top of one another on my body, and the weight of a corpse was pressing against my chest.